Bedtime Reading. White Fang. Chapter 1. The Journey. The weather was extremely cold. The river was frozen. Snow covered the trees. The place was silent and sad. A group of dogs were running on the frozen river. It was so cold that when the dogs breathed, their breath froze. The dogs pulled a large wooden sled. There was a very large wooden box on the sled, as well as some camping things like blankets and pots. 2 men were with the dogs. One walked in front of the dogs, and the other walked behind the sled. Inside the box there was a 3rd man. This man, however, was dead. The 2 men were wearing very thick clothes to keep their bodies warm. Their breath also froze as they breathed. They did not talk to each other as they traveled. The sky got dark. Suddenly, the men heard a sound from somewhere far away. It sounded like an animal cry. The 2 men then looked at each other and nodded. They heard the cry again. It was coming from behind them. Then they heard a 3rd cry, somewhere to the left of the 2nd cry. "They are following us," said the man in front of the sled. "They are looking for food. They are hungry," said the other man. The men soon stopped the sled and the dogs. They made a camp for the night. They sat next to a fire with their sled dogs. "The dogs are staying very close to the camp, Henry," said the man named Bill. The other man, Henry, made coffee in a pot on top of the fire. When he sat by Bill to begin eating, he said, "They know that they are safe with us. Besides, they would rather eat than be eaten." Bill said, "Henry, did you notice that the dogs were very anxious when I fed them tonight?" "Yes," said Henry. "They did seem more upset than usual." "How many dogs do we have, Henry?" said Bill. "6," said Henry. "Well, Henry, I also know that we have 6 dogs. I took 6 fish out of the bag to give to the dogs. I gave 1 fish to each dog. But when I got to the last dog, I was missing 1 fish. I think there was another dog, a 7th dog that ate one of the fish," said Bill. Henry looked at the dogs. "There's only 6, he said. "I saw the 7th dog run away," said Bill. "I know I saw 7. "I think you are starting to see things that are not real," said Henry. "I also thought that," answered Bill. "But I looked in the snow and I saw its footprints." Henry fearfully looked at Bill. "Do you think it was one of them?" he asked. Suddenly they heard another cry. Bill nodded his head. They could now hear more cries. The dogs were scared, and they stayed very close together and stood near the fire. Bill pointed to the large box on the sled and said, "He is much luckier than us. If you or I died, no one would care." "We don't have rich families," said Henry. "They couldn't pay for a long-distance funeral like this." "I don't understand how a rich young man like this guy would want to leave his comfortable home and come to a horrible place like this," said Bill. The dogs were now very afraid. Bill said, "We only have 3 bullets left in our gun. Also, the weather has been extremely cold. It's been 50 degrees below zero, negative 45 degrees Celsius, for 2 weeks. I wish that this journey was over now." The men went to sleep. The dogs began to make very loud noises, and Bill woke up. He saw 7 dogs again. In the morning, Bill asked Henry, "How many dogs do we have?" "6, Henry answered. "Wrong," said Bill. "We have 5 now. Fatty is not here. He always was a stupid dog." "He is stupid," said Henry, "but I don't think he'd want to kill himself." "Why did he run away? The other dogs won't run away." Chapter 2. The She-Wolf. When morning came, the men ate their breakfast and prepared the sled. They heard the cries again. It was wolves. The sky became light at 9 o'clock in the morning. They began their journey again. The men did not talk the entire day. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the sky became dark. This is what winter in the Arctic is like. They prepared their camp. After dark, the men could hear the wolves' cries coming closer and closer. The sled dogs were very afraid. "I wish that the wolves would find food somewhere else," said Bill. "They make me afraid," said Henry. The 2 men then did not speak again until they finished preparing their camp. Suddenly, Henry heard Bill screaming something, and heard a painful cry from one of the dogs. A dog ran away from the camp into the darkness. Bill was standing near the dogs, holding a club. "I hit the wolf. Did you hear it scream?" asked Bill. "What did the wolf look like?" asked Henry. "I could not see it clearly, but it looked like a dog," said Bill. "It must be a wolf or dog that used to live with people," said Henry. "I agree. It is very clever. It tried to get our fish," said Bill. The men ate dinner and went to bed. In the morning, they discovered that another dog named Frog was gone. Frog was a clever and strong dog. In fact, Frog was the strongest sled dog that the men had. The men were very sad. They quietly ate their breakfast and prepared the sled with the last 4 dogs. As the men traveled that day, they heard the wolf cries behind them. When they stopped for camp that afternoon, Bill put some rope on the dogs so that they would not run away. As the men prepared to go to sleep, the sled dogs suddenly became very upset and made a lot of noise. One of the dogs, named One Ear, tried to break the rope. The men saw another dog standing near the fire. It was a wolf. It was looking at the sled dogs. The dogs were anxious. "It is a she-wolf. Now I know why Fatty and Frog left camp. She has been attracting the dogs and taking them to the other wolves. Then the other wolves eat them," said Henry. "That is the same animal that I hit yesterday. She understands campfires." "That is very strange," said Bill. "It does know more about people than the other wolves. She probably used to be a person's dog, but she ran away. Now she lives with the wolves," said Henry. "We can't lose any more dogs," said Bill. The next morning, Henry awoke early and cooked breakfast. When Bill awoke, Henry said, Another dog is gone." "How did it happen? I tied them," said Bill. "One of the other dogs chewed the rope and broke it," said Henry. The men began their journey again. Later, when the men were resting, Bill took the gun and went for a walk. When he returned, he said, "The wolves are following us. They are very thin and look like they haven't eaten anything for many weeks. They really want food." Then Bill saw the she-wolf walking in the distance. It walked closer and closer to the men and the dogs. The men could see that the she-wolf was very large. Her fur was red. The other wolves had gray fur. "It looks like a sled dog," Bill said. The animal was not afraid. She stood and watched the men. That night, the men stopped their journey early. They only had 3 dogs left, and the dogs were tired from pulling the heavy sled. The men went to sleep very early. During the night, the wolves were very close to the camp. The dogs were very afraid. Bill was also afraid. "The wolves are following us. They are going to kill us, Henry," he cried. "Don't say that," shouted Henry. "If you say that, then maybe they will kill you. Be quiet and go to sleep." Chapter 3. The Hungry Wolves. The day started well. The men lost no dogs during the night. Around the middle of the day, the sled had an accident. It was between a large rock and a big tree, and the men could not move it. To move the sled, they took the dogs from the sled. Then they pushed the sled. As the men were pushing, a dog named One Ear began to run away. Henry called to One Ear, but the dog did not stop running. The she-wolf was waiting for him. One Ear ran to the she-wolf. Suddenly, many wolves appeared. The wolves were ready to attack One Ear. Bill took the gun. He ran to the wolves. He wanted to rescue One Ear. "I won't let them kill another dog," he shouted. "Be careful," called Henry. Henry sat on the sled. There were many trees, so Henry could not see Bill and One Ear. Suddenly, he heard a violent sound and a cry of pain. Then everything was quiet. He knew the wolves killed both One Ear and Bill. Henry was extremely sad and frightened. After sitting on the sled for a few moments, he got up. He fixed the sled. Then he connected the dogs to the sled. He started the journey again. He helped the dogs pull the sled. He did not travel far. He quickly prepared camp. He made a very large fire, and he had a lot of wood for the fire. Henry did not sleep that night because the wolves were very close. They sat near the fire all night, watching him and the last 2 dogs. He made the fire very large. He knew it was the only thing that could save him. His dogs were close to him. He protected them. If the wolves came too close, he would throw burning wood at the wolves. In the morning, Henry was very tired. He cooked and ate breakfast. At about 9 o'clock in the morning, the wolves left the camp. Then Henry built a platform in the trees. He put the large box from the sled on top of the platform and said to the dead man in the box, "They ate Bill, and they might eat me. I won't let them eat you." Then Henry began the journey. The sled moved much faster without the large box. The wolves were following Henry. He finished the journey early that day to prepare a fire. He made the fire into a big circle. He and the dog sat inside the circle of fire for protection. Henry wondered when the wolves would finally eat him. He put more wood on the fire. The she-wolf stood by the fire and looked at him. Henry threw a piece of burning wood at her. She quickly ran away. Again, Henry did not sleep the entire night. When the day began at 9 o'clock, the wolves did not leave. This was the first time that they stayed during the day. They surrounded the fire. He could not go and get more wood for the fire. All day he and the dog sat in the circle of fire. Night came. Henry tried not to sleep, but he could not control himself. He slept. He dreamed that he was safe in a small city, but there were wolves outside the city trying to kill him. Suddenly, Henry woke up and saw his reality. The wolves were attacking him. One wolf was biting his arm. Henry could feel the teeth of the wolf in his skin. Another wolf bit his leg. He ran to the fire and stood inside the fire. He was wearing thick gloves on his hands, so he picked up burning wood from the fire and threw it at the wolves. His skin was now burning, and the fire was hotter than he could bear. The wolves moved away from the fire. Henry walked out of the fire. The last 2 dogs were gone. "You're not going to kill me!" he screamed at the wolves. Henry got more wood. He made the fire larger. He sat inside the circle of fire. In the morning, the fire was low. Henry needed more wood. When he tried to step out of the fire, the wolves ran to him. A wolf tried to get inside the fire, but it stepped on some burning wood and screamed. The fire was getting smaller. There were now parts of the fire circle that were not burning, and the wolves could walk inside. Henry had no hope left. "You can come and get me," he said to the wolves. Then he went to sleep. Moments later, Henry awoke. The wolves were gone. He heard people, sleds, and dogs. 6 men stood by Henry. They asked him what had happened. Henry was so tired that he could not explain. He said, "She-wolf, our dogs. She ate the dogs. Then Bill." "Where's Lord Alfred?" one of the men asked. He meant the dead man in the box. "He's in the last camp," said Henry. And then he slept. Chapter 4. The Wolves. The she-wolf heard the men and the dogs arrive. She was the first to leave the man in the fire. The other wolves did not want to leave. They had waited for a long time to kill and eat the man. They did not want to waste their effort. Finally, because the men and their dogs were close, the other wolves left too. The wolves ran. There were many of them. A large gray male ran in front of the others. He was the leader. When they saw the she-wolf, they ran to meet her. She joined the group. She stayed next to the large leader. The leader liked the she-wolf very much. Another wolf also liked the she-wolf very much. He also ran next to her. He was an old wolf. He had fought many times during his life. In fact, He lost his right eye during a fight. There were many wolves in the group. The strong wolves ran in the front of the group. The weak and old wolves ran in the back. They were all very thin and hungry. They ran all day and night looking for food. When they arrived at a river, they saw a large moose, an animal that looks like a very large deer, standing near the river. Because the wolves needed food, they attacked the moose. It was dangerous, and many wolves died during the fight, but they were successful. The moose was dead. The moose was huge, so they had plenty of meat to eat. The wolves ate the entire moose. Because there was now food, many wolves left the group. Pairs of males and females left the group together. They went to find a new home. The she-wolf stayed with the two male wolves. One day, the old wolf with one eye suddenly attacked and killed the gray leader. Now he could be with the she-wolf. After the fight, One Eye and the she-wolf ran and played together in the forest. For many days they traveled and hunted together. One night, One Eye was running through the forest. He suddenly stopped and smelled the air. The she-wolf also smelled the air. They followed the smell to the edge of the forest. They heard people. The smell was the food that people were cooking. There was an Indian camp nearby. Here, the word Indian is used to mean North American Indian. These are the original people of North America. The she-wolf knew about Indian camps. The she-wolf was happy and excited. She wanted to go to the camp. One Eye, however, did not want to go. He walked into the forest. The she-wolf followed him. Soon they found footprints in the snow. They were very new and made by a small animal. They followed the footprints. It was a rabbit. Together they killed and ate the rabbit. Chapter 5. The Cave. For 2 days the she-wolf and One Eye stayed near the Indian camp. The she-wolf wanted to go to the camp, but One Eye did not. Then, on the 3rd day, one of the Indians saw One Eye and tried to shoot him with a gun. He did not kill One Eye, but One Eye was afraid. Finally, the wolves left the camp. They walked for a couple of days. The she-wolf was searching for something. Her body was getting very big. She couldn't run very fast. She was pregnant. Finally, the she-wolf found the place that she was looking for. It was a small cave with a narrow entrance. It was next to a stream. When she saw the cave, she ran to it and entered it. Inside, it was small, dry, and comfortable. She laid down and relaxed. She was very happy. One Eye was hungry. He tried to go to sleep in the cave, but he could not sleep. It was now spring, and the weather was very good. One Eye wanted to go outside and enjoy the sunshine. One Eye wanted the she-wolf to go outside with him, but she was too tired. Therefore, he went outside alone. The sun was very bright, and the snow was melting. He walked to the stream. For the next 8 hours, One Eye looked for animals to kill and eat. He found some rabbits, but he did not catch them. He returned to the cave hungry. When One Eye returned to the cave, he heard strange sounds inside. When he went inside the cave, the she-wolf gave him a look and said,
"Stay away."
Therefore, he did not go near the she-wolf. He wondered what the strange sounds were. That night, One Eye slept near the entrance of the cave. In the morning, he heard the strange noises again. He wanted to know what was making the noises. The she-wolf again looked at him angrily, so he did not go near her. One Eye saw, however, that there was something lying between the she-wolf's legs. It was 5 tiny puppies. Although One Eye had been a father in the past, he was still surprised to see these baby wolves. One Eye needed to find food for his family. He left the cave and walked for a long time. As he walked, he saw a large bird. He caught the bird. When he began to eat it, he remembered the she-wolf and the babies at the cave. He then began to carry the bird to the cave. Then he found a large rabbit and killed it. Because he could not carry both of the animals to the cave, he ate the bird himself and took the rabbit to the cave. The she-wolf was very happy about the rabbit. She licked One Eye's neck to thank him. One Eye was very happy. He was a good father. Chapter 6. The Little Gray Wolf. One of the baby wolves was different from his brothers and sisters. Most of the babies had red fur. This one, however, was gray like his father. When the baby wolf's eyes finally opened, he could see very clearly. He knew his brothers and sisters very well. They played together. He loved his mother very much. She was very gentle and warm, and she gave him good food to eat. When he slept next to her. For the first month of his life, he slept most of the time. Now that he could see well, he was awake most of the day. He knew the cave very well. It was his world. He did not know anything about the world outside. The little gray wolf knew that one of the walls in the cave was different than the others. The wall had a lot of light, while the others were dark. He often looked at that wall and tried to walk to it, but his mother would not let him. He wanted more than anything to go to that wall. Again and again he tried to walk to it, but his mother always stopped him. He was a very fierce little wolf. His brothers and sisters were also fierce. After all, they were wolves. But the little gray wolf was the fiercest of all the baby wolves. He could easily scare his brothers and sisters with his loud growls. A growl is a sound that a wolf or dog makes deep in its throat to frighten others. Every day the little gray wolf was interested in the wall. He knew it was special. He did not know that it was actually the entrance to the cave. He saw his father, One Eye, walk through it many times. He could not understand this, because his mother would not allow him to go near the wall of light. He tried walking through other walls of the cave. After hitting his nose several times, he knew he could not walk through the other walls. After many days, there was no food to eat. Every day, One Eye would go hunting for meat and would return with nothing. His mother stopped having milk. At first, the baby wolves cried. Then they had no energy, so they just slept. One by one, the baby wolves died. One Eye looked everywhere for food, but he could find nothing. The she-wolf also left the cave to go and hunt for meat. They could find nothing. When the little gray wolf awoke after a long sleep, his brothers and sisters were gone. He did not know that they had all died. Food finally arrived. The little gray wolf became stronger. Because he was now the only baby wolf in the cave, he learned to play by himself. One day, The little gray wolf noticed that his father stopped coming in and out of the wall of light. The she-wolf knew One Eye was dead, but she could not explain it to the little gray wolf. When the she-wolf went out to hunt for meat, she found the place where One Eye had been killed. Another animal, a lynx, killed One Eye. After that day, the she-wolf was careful not to go near the lynx's cave. Chapter 7. The Wall. When his mother left the cave to hunt for meat, the little wolf did not go to the wall of light. He did not want to be punished. Still, the little wolf was getting older. He was very curious. He wanted to be a good little wolf, but he also wanted to see what was on the other side of the wall of light. One day, the little wolf could not control himself any more. He began to walk to the wall. As he walked to the wall, it seemed to move. He kept walking and walking. His little nose did not hit the wall. He was confused. The light got brighter and brighter. Suddenly, there was bright light everywhere. He looked everywhere. It was wonderful and exciting. Part of him wanted to go back, but he walked to the outside of the cave. The light was so bright it made his eyes hurt. After living in a small cave, there was not so much space. He felt dizzy. He looked at the trees, the sky, and the mountains. The little wolf had never seen these things before. He was afraid. Soon, he was excited by the new things that he saw, and he forgot to be afraid. He saw things that were close to him and things that were far away. Suddenly, he fell down a hill. His little body rolled and rolled. He hit his nose on the ground, and he began to cry. Because the inside of the cave was flat, he did not understand how the ground could not be flat sometimes. He was very afraid now. The bottom of the hill was covered with soft grass. When the little wolf stopped rolling, he stopped crying. Then he got up and cleaned himself. He looked around again. He was very curious about everything. He looked closely at all of the plants and flowers around him. He saw a squirrel on the ground. When he walked to it, the squirrel saw him. The squirrel was scared, so it ran away. This gave the little wolf some courage and confidence. He then saw a large bird and ran to it. The bird was very angry and hit the little wolf's nose. This hurt the wolf, and he cried again. He cried so loud that the bird flew away. The little wolf discovered meat just outside the cave. He found 7 baby birds hidden under a small tree. At first, he did not know what they were. They made noises, and it scared him. When he realized that they were very little, he had more courage. He touched one of them with his foot. It was very fun. He then smelled them. He put one in his mouth. He could feel it move in his mouth. He felt hungry, and he knew that he wanted to eat the baby bird. He closed his mouth and ate the baby bird. He felt the blood in his mouth, and it tasted good. After that, he ate the other baby birds. Suddenly, the mother of the birds returned. She saw the little wolf and was very angry. She hit him with her wings. The little wolf was scared and confused. He put his head in between his feet and began to cry. The mother bird hit him again and again. Finally, the wolf became very angry. He stood up and bit the mother bird. He loved fighting with the bird. It was exciting. They fought and fought. Soon, both the little wolf and the bird were very tired. Then the bird hit his nose. Because another bird had already hit his nose, it hurt very much. He ran away. As he ran, the little wolf found a stream. This was the first time he had seen water and did not know what it was. He walked to the water and put one of his feet in the water. His foot went in deeper than he expected. Then his entire body fell in the water. It was very cold. He cried. Water went into his mouth and he could not breathe. He was very afraid. He thought that he was going to die. Then he could breathe air again. He moved his legs and began to swim. He swam to the land. He quickly got out of the water. Then he laid down and rested. He now understood what water was. He was learning so much that day. The little wolf suddenly remembered his mother. He knew he wanted to see her very much. His body and brain were very tired from his adventure. He wanted his mother. He looked for the cave. As he was walking between two trees, he heard a loud, frightening cry. He looked down and saw a tiny baby weasel. A weasel is another animal that lives in the North American forest. It has a long and skinny body about the length of a cat and eats other small animals. It is a fierce little animal. The baby weasel tried to run away, but the little wolf touched it with his foot. It made a strange noise. Suddenly he saw the mother weasel. She attacked him. She bit him. He could feel her teeth in his skin. It was really painful. He screamed. He tried to run, but the weasel would not let him move. The mother weasel then quickly ran to the baby weasel. The two weasels then ran away from the little wolf. The little wolf was still crying when the mother weasel returned. She looked at him and screamed at him. It really frightened him. Slowly, she came closer to him. Then she jumped and bit his throat. Her teeth were very sharp. The little wolf tried to fight with her, but he could not. He could not escape the weasel. She was still biting his neck. Suddenly, the she-wolf appeared. The weasel stopped biting the little wolf and tried to attack the she-wolf. She jumped to the she-wolf's throat, but she missed. The she-wolf then killed the weasel. The little wolf was happy to see his mother again. The she-wolf was also very happy to find her baby. She licked his fur and made him feel safe and comfortable. Then, together, they ate the weasel. After that, they returned to the cave. Chapter 8. Meat. The little wolf rested inside the cave for 2 days, and then he went outside again. He walked and walked. When he became tired, he returned to the cave. Every day he walked farther from the cave. With time, the little wolf could run very quickly. When he hunted with his mother, he could easily go with her and not become tired. Also, he could now walk very quietly so that other animals could not see him. Since killing the baby birds and the baby weasel, he was very excited about killing. He wanted to kill more animals. The little wolf loved his mother very much. He also respected her. She could always find meat, and she was afraid of nothing. She had a lot of knowledge. She taught the little wolf many things. Soon the little wolf and his mother could not find any meat. He became very hungry. The she-wolf was almost always looking for meat. She hardly returned to the cave. Before, the little wolf only hunted as a hobby. Now he hunted for his life, but he found nothing. Therefore, he had to learn many new ways to hunt. He studied the squirrels and how they moved in the trees. He waited for the right time to attack. He also learned the ways of mice and of birds. He was now stronger, wiser, and more confident. Finally, the she-wolf found some meat. She brought it to the little wolf, and he was very happy. It was very strange meat. The little wolf had never seen that meat before. In fact, it was a baby lynx. His mother had found the lynx's cave and killed and ate her babies. She brought this one back for the little wolf. After his meal, the little wolf laid down by his mother and went to sleep. Then a loud, horrible sound woke him. He had never heard such a terrible sound. He looked up and saw the lynx standing in the cave's entrance. She was very angry because the she-wolf killed her babies. The little wolf was very frightened. He quickly got up and stood beside his mother. The lynx tried to enter the cave, but the she-wolf attacked her. The two animals fought. The fight was very violent. They bit and hit each other. The little wolf quickly ran to the lynx and bit its back leg. He continued biting. For a long time he did not open his mouth. Although he did not know it, he probably saved his mother's life. When the two mothers separated, the lynx could not move fast, because the little wolf was biting her leg. The lynx's body then fell. Unfortunately, the little wolf was under the lynx when she fell. He could not move, but he kept biting the lynx's leg. Finally, the fight was over. The lynx was dead. The she-wolf was hurt. She could not move. For a whole day and night she lay by the dead lynx. Finally, she had enough strength to stand. For the next week, the she-wolf rested. She left the cave only to drink water. By the end of the week, the wolves had eaten the lynx. The she-wolf was feeling much stronger. After the she-wolf was healthy again, the little wolf hunted with her every day. He learned how to hunt and kill animals. His mother taught him very well. He was a successful hunter. Chapter 9. The People. One day the little wolf went for a walk in the forest. When he walked near the stream, he saw something very strange. 5 strange animals were sitting in front of him. He had never seen anything like them before. The animals watched him. The little wolf was afraid of the animals, but he did not feel that they were dangerous. They did not attack him. Actually, they did not move at all. The 5 animals were actually people. The little wolf knew that these animals were different from all other animals. He knew that these animals often controlled other animals. If he were an adult wolf, he would have known about people. Therefore, he would have quickly run away from the people. However, he was just a little wolf, so he stayed and looked at the people. Although he was afraid, he watched them for several moments. The men were Indians. One of the men stood up and walked to the little wolf. He showed his teeth to the man, hoping to frighten the man. The man laughed and said, "Look, his fangs are white." The other men laughed. They told the man to take the little wolf. When the man tried to pick up the wolf became very angry. The little wolf bit the man's hand. The man was angry. He hit the little wolf so hard that the wolf's body fell to the ground. He stopped biting the man's hand. He then started to cry. The man hit the little wolf again. The wolf cried and cried. The other men laughed. Then the man who had hit the wolf also laughed. Suddenly, the wolf and the men heard a sound from inside the forest. The wolf knew that his mother was coming to rescue him. He stopped crying. He knew his mother would scare the men. She might even hurt them. He knew his mother was fierce and brave. When she found the little wolf with the men, she was very angry. She showed the men her sharp fangs. As she stood over the little wolf, a deep, terrible sound came from inside her throat. When dogs and wolves make this sound, it is called growling. Suddenly, one of the men shouted, "Kichi!" Then the she-wolf suddenly stopped growling and relaxed her body. The man again shouted, "Kichi!" Then the little wolf saw something that he did not expect. The she-wolf laid down on the ground and began wagging her tail. If a tail wags, it means that it quickly moves back and forth. It describes what dogs' tails do when dogs are happy. The little wolf did not understand. He was shocked. The people could even control his mother. The man who had spoken walked to the she-wolf. Kichi, the word that he said earlier, was the name of the she-wolf. Kichi then allowed the man to touch her. Then the other man came to her. They also touched her. They were very happy and excited. The men talked about Kichi. One of them said, "She has a baby wolf. This is not strange. Although his mother was a dog, his father was a wolf." Another Indian said, "She ran away a year ago. At that time we had no food. The dogs also had no food. She went to find food. She found some wolves and lived with them, and now she has a baby wolf," said a third Indian, pointing to the little wolf. The third Indian then touched the little wolf. The wolf was angry and showed his teeth. Then the man hit the wolf. Then the wolf obeyed. He kept his mouth shut when the man touched him again. The man's hand moved back and forth on the little wolf's back. A man named Gray Beaver began to talk. He was looking at the little wolf and said, "His mother is definitely Kichi. His father, however, was a wolf. Therefore, he is 1/4 dog and 3/4 wolf. His fangs are very white, so his name will be White Fang. He will be my dog. Kichi was my brother's dog, but my brother is dead now. Therefore, Kichi and White Fang are my dogs." White Fang watched the men talk. They made a lot of strange sounds with their mouths. White Fang then went to his mother and sat next to her. One of the men tried to play with White Fang. Kichi was anxious watching them. White Fang knew that the men did not want to hurt him, so he let the man touch him. Besides, it felt very nice. The man then stopped touching White Fang and got up and left. White Fang was a little sad. White Fang was learning not to be afraid of the men. After a while, White Fang heard more strange sounds. The sounds were getting closer and closer. He then realized that they were more people sounds. A few minutes later, many more Indians arrived. They were going to prepare their camp. Altogether, there were about 40 Indians. There were men, women, and children. They were carrying many things for their camp. They also had many dogs with them. The dogs carried things on their backs. The Indians often moved to different camps. Each time the Indians moved to a new camp, the dogs would help the Indians carry their things. This was the first time that White Fang had seen dogs. He knew that dogs were like him, but also different from him. When the dogs saw White Fang and Kitchi, they were not afraid. White Fang suddenly became fierce and wanted to attack the dogs. He ran to them. He tried to attack them. The dogs were angry and attacked White Fang. Then there was a big fight between the dogs and White Fang. He could feel some of their teeth biting into him, and he tried to bite them. Then he heard the loud and angry voices of the people. The men stopped the fight. In a few seconds, White Fang was away from the other dogs. The men were throwing stones at the dogs to keep them away from White Fang. They were protecting White Fang. He was very happy and surprised to see the men helping him. The men then tied a rope to Kitchi's neck. They did not allow her to walk freely. White Fang did not like the people controlling his mother. As the Indians walked, a child took Kitchi's rope and held it as he walked. Kitchi followed the child, and White Fang followed Kitchi. White Fang was worried about walking with the people. He did not know where they were going. The people and dogs walked to the stream. Then they walked next to the stream for a long time. They walked for a very long time. When they stopped walking, they were at a place that White Fang had never been. The Indians began to prepare their camp. White Fang watched everything. He also watched the dogs. He could not believe how the dogs obeyed the people. White Fang watched the people prepare their houses. The houses were very large round tents. They looked like huge upside-down ice cream cones. At first he was a little afraid of the houses. He watched the people entering and leaving them. He also watched the dogs trying to enter them. The people would not let the dogs enter the houses. White Fang walked to the side of one of the Indian houses. He touched the cloth of the house with his nose. It had a strange smell. He bit the cloth and gently pulled it with his mouth. He pulled harder and harder. The whole house moved with his pulls. Finally, a person inside the house shouted at him. Then White Fang ran to his mother. He was not afraid of the Indian houses any more. The Indians tied Kitchi's rope to a large stick. The stick was in the ground, so that she could not walk away. White Fang soon became bored. He wanted to walk in the camp and look at the people. However, because of the stick, Kitchi could not walk with White Fang. Therefore, White Fang walked alone. After he left Kitchi, he soon met a young dog that was a little older and larger than him. This dog's name was Lip Lip. White Fang wanted to make friends with Lip Lip, but Lip Lip was very mean to White Fang. Lip Lip was also very mean to other dogs. He liked to fight. Lip Lip showed his teeth to White Fang. Then Lip Lip attacked White Fang's shoulder. It was very painful. White Fang became very angry and attacked Lip Lip. Lip Lip knew how to fight, so he bit White Fang many times. It was very painful. White Fang was afraid, so he ran away from Lip Lip. He ran to Kitchi. He sat by her for a long time. After a while, White Fang became bored again. He forgot about Lip Lip and went for another walk in the camp. He saw Gray Beaver. He walked to Gray Beaver and watched him for a long time. Gray Beaver was doing something strange with sticks and grass. Gray Beaver saw White Fang and gently talked to him. It was exciting to watch. Women and children were helping Gray Beaver. They were bringing him many sticks. Gray Beaver was rubbing the sticks together very quickly. Then White Fang saw something strange coming from the sticks. It was the same color as the sun. This was the first time White Fang saw smoke and fire, but he did not understand what smoke and fire were. He walked to the fire. He wanted to know more about it. The fire attracted White Fang. He touched the fire with his nose and tongue. After a second, he knew he had made a mistake. He screamed in pain. It was the most pain he had felt in his life. He ran to Kitchi. He was crying and screaming. White Fang did not know what to do. Both his nose and his tongue were in great pain. He tried to lick his nose with his tongue, but it made the pain worse. He cried and cried. As he cried, the men laughed at him. He understood why they laughed at him. He felt stupid, ashamed, and embarrassed. He wanted to hide or run away. Kitchi was the only one who was not laughing at him. Night came, and White Fang lay by his mother. His nose and tongue hurt. He missed the cave. He did not like being with the people. He was not free any longer. He felt very nervous and uncomfortable about staying with the people. But as he watched the people, he knew that they were strong and smart animals. They could even make fire out of sticks as grass. They were like gods. Chapter 10. Life with the People. For many days, Kitchi could not walk freely through the camp. She was still tied to the rope. Therefore, White Fang walked by himself. He saw and learned many things about the people. He thought that the people were very clever because they could do many things that other animals could not do. For example, the people could make fire and houses. White Fang watched his mother obey the people. Therefore, he also obeyed them. When they called his name, he came to them. When they scolded him, he cried. He knew that if he did not obey, the people would beat and hit him. However, White Fang was not completely comfortable with the people. He was a wolf, a wild animal. Before living with the Indians, he lived freely in the forest. He could not forget that life. Sometimes he would see the forest and walk to it. He would stand on the edge of the camp and look into the forest. He wanted to return to the forest, but he did not have the courage to return. He would always return to his mother. White Fang also learned the ways of the people and other dogs in the camp. If the people gave meat and fish to the dogs, sometimes the older and stronger dogs could be very unfair. They would take all of the food. Then the other dogs would not get any food. He learned that the men were very fair people. He also knew that the women sometimes gave him pieces of meat and bones to eat. The worst thing about White Fang's life at the camp was Lip Lip. Lip Lip was larger, stronger, and older than White Fang. Every time that White Fang left Kitchi for a walk, Lip Lip would follow him and attack him. Lip Lip forced White Fang to fight. Lip Lip always won the fights. Lip Lip enjoyed winning the fights. Lip Lip made White Fang suffer a lot. The fights had a bad effect on White Fang. He became very angry and hateful. Although he had always had a bad temper, it was getting worse. Also, because of Lip Lip, White Fang had no friends. He walked and played by himself. Whenever he walked near the other dogs, Lip Lip would attack him or chase him away. Because of his suffering, White Fang became very clever. Because the other dogs would take his meat and fish, he found other ways to get food. He became a thief. He also learned to walk through the camp with no one seeing him and to know what was happening everywhere at any time. He knew where Lip Lip was at all times and was very good at avoiding him. Lip Lip was afraid of Kitchi, so he never attacked White Fang near Kitchi. One day, however, the dogs were running very quickly, so Lip Lip was not paying attention. Therefore, when White Fang ran to Kitchi, Lip Lip followed him. When Kitchi saw Lip Lip chasing White Fang, she was very angry. She used her foot and pushed Lip Lip to the ground. She hit him several times, and then she bit him many times. Then Lip Lip stood up and began to walk away. White Fang attacked him. He ran to Lip Lip and quickly bit Lip Lip's back leg. Lip Lip screamed in pain, but he was so weak and tired that he did not fight back. The people ran to see what was happening. They threw rocks at White Fang to punish him. The next day, Gray Beaver decided that Kitchi would not run away from the camp again. Therefore, he released her from the rope and let her walk freely. White Fang was very happy, being able to walk with his mother. When White Fang was with Kitchi, Lip Lip did not go near White Fang. Later that day, Kitchi and White Fang walked to the edge of the camp. Together, they looked into the forest. White Fang slowly led Kitchi into the forest. He wanted to return to the cave. He walked a few steps. Then he stopped and looked back. Kitchi had not moved. He looked at her and cried, but she would not move. He ran back to her and then ran into the forest again. She still did not follow him. As he looked at her, she turned her head and looked at the camp. Kitchi knew that she must live with the people. She could not go back to the forest. Kitchi then turned around and walked into the camp. White Fang sat on the ground and cried. He smelled the air and the trees. The smell reminded him of the forest and the cave. He was still a young wolf and still needed his mother. Therefore, he could not return to the forest by himself. He got up and walked to the camp. He wanted to find his mother. As he returned to the camp, he cried a lot. He really missed the forest. Soon came a horrible day. Kitchi had to leave White Fang. Gray Beaver was in debt to another Indian in the camp. The Indian's name was Three Eagles. Three Eagles was going on a very long trip. Gray Beaver gave Kitchi to Three Eagles to pay him back. When Kitchi and Three Eagles got on Three Eagles' boat to leave the camp, White Fang tried to follow her. Gray Beaver hit him on his head to make him stay on the land. The boat then left the land and began moving on the river. White Fang jumped into the water and tried to swim to the boat. White Fang was very frightened of losing his mother. Therefore, he did not obey Gray Beaver. Gray Beaver then took a boat into the river to get White Fang. He arrived at the place in the river where White Fang was swimming. He reached for White Fang and picked him up. Before he put White Fang in the boat, however, he beat the little wolf several times. It was very painful. White Fang was very angry and sad. He had just lost his mother. Now, Gray Beaver was punishing him. He showed his teeth to Gray Beaver. This made Gray Beaver more angry, and he beat White Fang several more times. Each time was harder and more painful. White Fang could not stand the beating. He began to cry. Finally, Gray Beaver stopped beating White Fang. White Fang cried and cried. Gray Beaver was satisfied with the beating and threw White Fang into the boat. At the time, Gray Beaver realized the boat had moved very far in the river, so he reached for the paddle, the stick used to move the boat in the water, to move the boat back to land. White Fang was on the paddle, so Gray Beaver kicked White Fang to move him off the paddle. This made White Fang angry, and he bit the foot of Gray Beaver. The earlier beating was nothing compared to this one. This beating was terrible. Gray Beaver's anger was horrible, as well as White Fang's fear. Gray Beaver beat White Fang with his hand and then with the wooden paddle. Then he put him down in the canoe and kicked him several times. This time White Fang did not bite Gray Beaver's foot. He had learned his lesson about hurting people. When the boat came back to the land, White Fang lay in the boat. His body hurt very much. He quietly cried, but he did not move. Gray Beaver then picked up White Fang and threw him on the land. When his little body hit the land, he felt so much pain. It was terrible. Lip Lip had been watching everything, and as soon as he saw White Fang, he ran to him. Then he attacked him. White Fang had no strength to fight back. When Gray Beaver saw Lip Lip attack White Fang, he was very angry. He kicked Lip Lip very hard. Then Lip Lip ran away. White Fang was very happy. Even though Gray Beaver had just beat him, he knew that Gray Beaver was a very fair man. After Lip Lip ran from Gray Beaver, White Fang followed Gray Beaver to Gray Beaver's house. That night, White Fang could not sleep. He thought about his mother and cried. He cried so loud that Gray Beaver woke up and beat him again. After that, White Fang cried very quietly. He did not want to be beaten again. Sometimes, when the people were not watching, White Fang would walk to the edge of the woods and cry loudly to himself. He missed his mother very much. Some days, White Fang thought about leaving the camp and returning to the cave in the forest. However, he wanted to see his mother again, so he waited in the camp for her to return. Actually, White Fang was not unhappy in the camp. He liked watching the people work. He thought that life in the camp was interesting. Also, he was beginning to like Gray Beaver very much. White Fang now understood how to obey Gray Beaver. Therefore, Gray Beaver was very good to him. Sometimes Gray Beaver even gave White Fang some meat or fish. He got used to living with the people. Chapter 11. A Lonely Life. Lip Lip continued to make White Fang's life very unhappy. Whenever Lip Lip saw White Fang, he ran to him and started a fight. Therefore, because of Lip Lip, White Fang became unusually fierce and violent for a young wolf. Most of the people in the camp knew that White Fang was very fierce and violent. White Fang became better at fighting. He began to start many fights with Lip Lip and the other dogs. Whenever there was a dog fight in the camp, White Fang was probably there. Therefore, many of the people in the camp thought White Fang was very troublesome. They didn't understand that Lip Lip had made him that way. There were many young dogs in the camp, but White Fang had no friends. All of the dogs were Lip Lip's friends. Also, the dogs knew that White Fang was more of a wolf than a dog. Therefore, because he was different from them, they did not like him. They would often attack White Fang. White Fang, however, would always fight with them. He became a very good fighter. He would often hurt the other dogs. If one dog attacked him, he could easily win the fight. If many dogs attacked him at the same time, he would lose the fight. Therefore, White Fang learned two important things. The first thing was how to fight many dogs at the same time and win. The other thing was, if fighting only one dog, how to hurt that dog very badly. He also learned to always stay on his feet during fights. He would never fall or trip. Even if an adult dog fought with him, he would never fall. White Fang became a very skillful fighter. He could win fights very quickly. White Fang was still a young wolf. Therefore, his teeth and mouth were still small, and he could not actually kill another dog. However, one day he did manage to kill another dog in a fight. He did this by biting the dog's throat many times. After that, many people were very angry and upset. The dead dog's owner knew that White Fang killed his dog and was very angry. Therefore, the owner and the others went to Gray Beaver's house and said many bad things about White Fang. Gray Beaver simply listened to the others, but he would not let them take White Fang and hurt him. Gray Beaver was one of the few people in the camp who did not hate White Fang. After killing the dog, every other dog and almost every person in the camp hated White Fang. Whenever he saw another dog, the dog would show his teeth at him. Whenever he saw a person, the person would throw stones at him. Because of this, he was always ready to fight. He was never relaxed or happy. White Fang's life was very hard. He had no friends and was very lonely. Although the other dogs hated White Fang, they were very afraid of him. They would never walk in the camp alone because they were afraid White Fang would attack them. On the other hand, if a group of dogs saw White Fang, they would attack him. However, White Fang could run very quickly. Therefore, he would run from the other dogs. If the dogs chased him, he would run into the woods. The other dogs would follow him into the forest. Then they could not get out of the forest. They would not know where they were. Because White Fang was a wolf and knew the forest well, he always knew how to return to the camp. At these times, the dogs would start to cry. They could not get back to the camp. White Fang liked this game very much. The dogs and people in the camp continued to hate and fear White Fang. Therefore, White Fang never developed any kindness or gentleness. In fact, he did not understand things like kindness. The only thing he knew was that he needed to protect himself. Therefore, he became fiercer and fiercer. He continued to fight the other dogs. He was strong and clever. He became very good at fighting and protecting himself. Chapter 12. Finding Gray Beaver. It was now fall, and the Indians were preparing to move their camp to a different place. The Indians were very busy packing all of their houses, clothes, and other things for the move. White Fang watched everything happening and was very curious. Finally, when the Indians were putting all of their things on boats to take them down the river, White Fang understood that they were moving to a different place. When the boats started to leave the camp, White Fang decided that he was going to stay. He was going to use this opportunity to be free from the Indians and their dogs. He did not want to go with them. Therefore, he ran into the forest and stayed in the forest for a long time. He heard Gray Beaver calling his name, but he did not leave the forest. Soon, other people were looking for White Fang, including Gray Beaver's son and wife. White Fang heard all of them calling his name, but he did not come out of the forest. Hours passed by. Soon it was night. White Fang did not hear any more people calling his name. He came out of the woods and looked at the place where the camp used to be. Suddenly, he felt very sad and lonely. Because he did not go with Gray Beaver, he had made a mistake. He sat down on the ground and thought about how lonely he was. Then he became afraid. He did not feel safe any more. The dark shadows of the trees were very scary. He was also very cold. When he lived with Gray Beaver, he would sleep next to the house, and it would make his body warm. Now the ground was very cold. He often had to move his feet, because it was too cold for them to be in a place too long. At last, White Fang was hungry. He remembered the pieces of meat that Gray Beaver used to give to him, and he was very sad. White Fang was not really a wild wolf. He had lived with the people too long. Now he depended on them. Also, when he lived with the humans, life was interesting and exciting. There was always something to see or hear. Now there was nothing to see or hear. Also, it was dark and scary. Then he saw something dark moving very slowly towards him. White Fang became very afraid and cried. After a few moments, he realized that it was just a shadow of a tree. Then the tree above him made a loud noise. He again became very afraid and started to run away. He ran to the center of the camp and stopped. He looked around the camp and thought about the Indians. He walked to the place where Gray Beaver's house used to be and stood for a few minutes. He thought about Gray Beaver and Kitchi. He began to cry. He cried for Kitchi and Gray Beaver because he missed them both very much. In fact, he would have been happy even if the Indians were throwing rocks at him. He cried and cried. When morning came, White Fang was even more lonely. He could see the camp clearly. He could clearly see that no one was there with him. Everywhere he looked, he could clearly see that he was alone. Finally, he decided to go and find Gray Beaver and the other Indians. He started to run. He ran next to the river all day. He did not even rest once. Even though he was very tired, he ran. The river then passed through the mountains, so he climbed many mountains. Then, when other rivers joined the river that he was following, he would cross the rivers. Because it was cold, the water in the rivers was turning into ice. Therefore, he would cross the river on the ice. A few times, however, the ice broke and he fell in the river. When he got out of the river, he did not stop. He ran as his fur turned into ice. The whole time that he ran, he looked for signs of the people. White Fang kept running. He ran all night looking for Gray Beaver. By the middle of the second day, he had been running for 30 hours and had not stopped once. His body was very tired and painful, but he kept going. He had not eaten any food in 40 hours. He was hungry and weak. His feet were bleeding and painful. To make things worse, it began to snow. Because of the snow, he could not see very clearly. Still, he kept going. Although White Fang did not know it, he was very close to Gray Beaver. Gray Beaver was camping next to the river. He had just killed a large moose and was now preparing the meat and moose skin for the winter. Night had come, and there was now more and more snow. At this time, White Fang was very tired. He was losing hope of finding Gray Beaver. The snow was so thick that White Fang could hardly see. Suddenly, White Fang saw the new tracks of a person. He smelled the tracks and immediately knew Gray Beaver was close by. With a cry of happiness and excitement, he quickly followed the tracks to Gray Beaver's camp. He saw Gray Beaver and his wife sitting by the fire eating meat. White Fang expected that Gray Beaver would beat him for running away from the camp. His body was very low to the ground, and he walked slowly into the camp with his head down. He just wanted to be next to the fire with Gray Beaver, so he was willing to let Gray Beaver beat him. As soon as Gray Beaver saw White Fang walk into the camp, he stopped eating. White Fang was slowly and painfully walking to him. His body shook with fear as he waited for the beating. Gray Beaver moved his hand up, but it did not hit White Fang. Instead, he took a piece of meat with the hand and gave it to White Fang to eat. Gray Beaver then gave him even more meat and made sure that the other dogs did not bother him while he ate. After that, White Fang lay by the fire. He was very happy to be with Gray Beaver again. Chapter 13. The Rules. In December, Gray Beaver went on a long journey. His wife and his son also went. Because it was the winter, a lot of snow was on the ground. Therefore, they had to go by sled. A group of dogs pulled the sleds. There were 2 sleds. Gray Beaver drove one of the sleds. Mitsah, Gray Beaver's son, drove the other sled. Puppies, young or baby dogs, pulled the sled. The sled was kind of a toy for Mitsah, but it taught Mitsah how to drive a sled. On the other hand, the puppies learned how to pull a sled. Gray Beaver and Mitsah used the sleds to carry many things. White Fang was one of the puppies pulling Mitsah's sled. Gray Beaver put some thick leather strings around his neck and back. Then he used rope to connect the leather strings to the sled. Altogether, 7 puppies pulled Mitsah's sled. The dogs were connected to the sled in a special way. The rope used to connect every dog was a different length. Therefore, the dogs could not attack each other as they ran. If one dog wanted to fight with the dog in front of him, he would only pull the sled more quickly. All of the puppies were older than White Fang. They were 9 or 10 months old. White Fang, however, was only 8 months old. Mitsah, Gray Beaver's son, was a wise boy. He saw Lip Lip treat White Fang unfairly many times. At that time, Mitsah could not punish Lip Lip because he was another person's dog. Lip Lip was now Mitsah's dog. To punish Lip Lip, Mitsah placed Lip Lip at the end of the longest rope. This made Lip Lip the dog in front of all of the other dogs. The front was the worst place to be. This was because when the dogs ran, all day they would see Lip Lip running before them. Hour after hour they would look at his back legs and his tail. They wanted to run after him, and because they were dogs, attack him. Mitsah had another way of punishing Lip Lip. He pretended that Lip Lip was his favorite dog. He gave Lip Lip more meat than the other dogs. When there was no meat to give the other dogs, Mitsah would still give meat to Lip Lip. This made the other dogs very jealous. They hated Lip Lip. White Fang enjoyed pulling the sled. Because he wanted to please Gray Beaver and Mitsah, he worked very diligently. He could pull heavier things than the other dogs. He could also run faster and longer than the other dogs. White Fang did not become friends with the other puppies. When they rested, White Fang did not play with them. This was because they were the puppies that helped Lip Lip attack him back in the camp. White Fang could not forget those times. When resting, White Fang would stay with Gray Beaver and Mitsah while the other puppies played together. The other puppies were a little afraid of White Fang. He growled if they were too close to him. Sometimes White Fang would try to take their meat. Therefore, when Gray Beaver gave meat to the other dogs, they would eat very quickly so that White Fang would not try to take it. The long journey took many months. White Fang's body became very strong after pulling the sled for many long days. He had also developed his view of the world around him. He felt that the world was a cold and unhappy place. He knew that he needed to be fierce. He did not know anything about love. Therefore, White Fang did not love Gray Beaver. He simply obeyed him because he was a strong and powerful man. Gray Beaver never spoke kindly or gently to White Fang. He also never touched or played with White Fang the way that most people touch or play with their dogs. The only time Gray Beaver touched White Fang was when he was beating him. Finally, Gray Beaver's journey was over. They reached a village near a large lake. After arriving, White Fang was hungry and went to look for food to eat. He saw some boys cutting some meat. Some small pieces of the meat fell on the ground. White Fang ate one of these small pieces. Then one of the boys picked up a stick. The boy walked to White Fang and tried to hit him with the stick. The boy missed White Fang. White Fang ran, but he ran to a place in between two houses. There was no escape. The boy was walking to White Fang. White Fang was very angry. He had eaten a piece of meat that no person would have eaten. It was not fair for the boy to punish him for eating the tiny piece of meat. White Fang had done nothing wrong. Because he was so angry, White Fang bit the hand of the boy that was holding the stick. When White Fang ran from the boy, he knew that he had done something wrong. Because he attacked the boy, he had broken one of the people's rules. He expected to be punished. He ran to Gray Beaver's tent. Soon the boy and the boy's family came. They wanted White Fang to be punished, but something happened that surprised White Fang very much. Gray Beaver defended White Fang. Mitsa also defended White Fang. They knew what White Fang did was fair. White Fang then understood that some people are fair and some people are not fair. Later that day, Mitsa went to the forest to get some wood for the fire. The boy who had been bitten and some other boys saw Mitsa and started talking with him. They said many angry things to him. Then the boys attacked Mitsa. They hit him many times. When White Fang saw this, he knew that he must protect Mitsa. White Fang ran to the boys. He began attacking and biting the boys. The boys were afraid, so they ran away from Mitsa and White Fang. Then Mitsa and White Fang returned to Gray Beaver's house. Mitsa told the story to Gray Beaver. Gray Beaver was very happy that White Fang had protected his son, so he gave White Fang a lot of meat. That night, White Fang slept by the fire with a full stomach. He was very happy. Gray Beaver and Mitsa were very fair and good people. Chapter 14. No Food. When White Fang was a year old, Gray Beaver's journey finally ended. They returned to the camp. White Fang was the largest 1-year-old dog in the camp. Although he was 1/4 dog, he did not look like a normal dog. He looked like a large, strong wolf. As he walked into the camp, he saw many people that he knew. He also saw many dogs that he had known before the long journey. Now that he was very large, he was not afraid of the other dogs. If the other dogs tried to attack White Fang or take his food, he would fight them. Therefore, the other dogs learned not to take White Fang's food. Because the other dogs would not fight White Fang, he had a lot of confidence and pride. He did not bother them. They did not bother him. Even the older dogs respected him. In the summer, White Fang saw Kitchi again. It had been a long time since they last saw each other. One day as he walked in the camp, he suddenly saw her outside of a strange tent. He stopped walking. He watched her for a long time. At first, he forgot who she was. He knew that he knew her, but he didn't know how. On the other hand, Kitchi entirely forgot White Fang. She did not recognize him. He had grown too much. She had some new puppies with her. She was protecting them. She did not want White Fang to bother her or the puppies, so she showed him her teeth to frighten him. When she did this, White Fang remembered her. He knew that she was his mother. Therefore, he went to her. When he arrived, however, Kitchi bit him. Sadly, White Fang understood. He left Kitchi. He had learned to live without her. When Kitchi bit White Fang, he did not fight her. He knew that it was wrong to fight with female dogs or wolves. He did not know why. It was natural for him to only fight with male dogs. As the months went by, White Fang still did not feel entirely comfortable living with the people. He was a wolf. Therefore, he was naturally wild. To live like a dog felt strange to him, although he did not understand why. Because of his discomfort, he became more lonely. He had no friends. Also, he became more fierce. The dogs never gave him any trouble. Gray Beaver, however, realized that White Fang was a special animal. He was glad to have White Fang. White Fang hated people laughing at him. If a person laughed at him, he would become extremely angry. If people laughed about something other than him, he did not care. If people laughed at him, it was horrible. He would become crazy with anger. At these times, he would attack any dog that he saw. Then he would run into the forest. He would stay in the forest until he relaxed. When White Fang was 3 years old, the Indians had a serious problem. There was no food to eat. That year, the rivers, streams, and lakes had no fish. They could not find any rabbits or deer to kill. Many people starved and died. Only the strong people did not die. The women and children gave all of their meat to the men. Therefore, the men had enough energy and strength to go hunting. Because they needed food, the Indians even ate their leather clothes and shoes. Many dogs killed and ate other dogs. The people would also kill and eat some of the dogs. Many of the dogs left the camp. They lived in the forest and looked for food. Many of these dogs also died in the forest because they could not find food. White Fang was one of the dogs that left the camp. He lived in the forest. Because he had lived in the forest when he was young, he knew how to hunt. He killed and ate squirrels. However, there were not many squirrels. Therefore, he ate many other small animals, such as mice and weasels. One day, he even found and killed another wolf. White Fang was lucky. He always found enough food. He walked to many different parts of the forest. He even returned to the cave in which he was born. When he arrived at the cave, he entered it. Kitchi was inside. She had also returned to the cave. When White Fang saw her, he left the cave. He found the cave of the lynx where his mother had killed many lynx's puppies years earlier. He slept in the lynx's cave. One day, as White Fang was walking in the forest looking for food, he met Lip Lip. Like White Fang, Lip Lip lived in the forest because there was no food at the camp. Lip Lip had not been successful with hunting. He was very thin and weak. White Fang, however, had been very successful. He was strong. As soon as he saw Lip Lip, White Fang remembered how Lip Lip had made him suffer. White Fang immediately attacked Lip Lip. Lip Lip was too weak to fight. White Fang bit Lip Lip's throat. He killed Lip Lip. The next day, when White Fang was walking by the river, he saw a camp. It looked like the Indian camp. However, this camp was in a different place. He smelled the air. It definitely was the same Indian camp. He walked to the camp. There was now plenty of food everywhere. He looked for Gray Beaver. He did not find Gray Beaver, but he found Gray Beaver's wife. She was very happy to see White Fang. She gave him a big fish to eat. Chapter 15. The Enemy of His Kind. White Fang was the strongest sled dog. Therefore, Gray Beaver made White Fang the leader of the sled dogs. After that day, the other dogs truly hated White Fang. When Gray Beaver or Mitsa gave White Fang extra meat and fish, the other dogs were very angry. White Fang also hated the other dogs. He hated being at the front of the sled. It was horrible, but he had to bear it. He was strong. Every time Mitsa started the sled, the other dogs would begin chasing him. After that, the only thing that he could do was run. He would run all day. During the night, he would fight with the other dogs. Every night, the dogs were angry after a long day of chasing White Fang. They wanted to hurt him. Every time they attacked White Fang, however, they would lose. White Fang would always win the fights. The dogs also hated White Fang for another reason. White Fang was actually a wolf. White Fang was too horrible to fight alone, so many dogs would attack him together. Therefore, he never got the chance to kill another dog. As soon as he would be ready to bite a dog's throat, the other dogs would attack him. The other dogs could not kill White Fang. They tried to kill him many times, but he was too quick and too clever. The other dogs could never make him fall or trip. White Fang always stayed on his feet. Gray Beaver often saw the other dogs fight with White Fang. Gray Beaver respected White Fang very much. He knew that White Fang was a very special animal. The other Indians also knew that White Fang was a special animal. The Indians all agreed that they had never seen a dog as fierce as White Fang. When White Fang was 5 years old, he went on a long journey with Gray Beaver. When they camped at night, other dogs would fight with White Fang. White Fang always fought fiercely, and people at the camps remembered White Fang for many years. They never saw a dog fight as well as White Fang fought. He could fight faster and better than any other dog. He could easily kill another dog. In the summer, Gray Beaver's journey ended. He and the sled dogs arrived at a city. The city was called Fort Yukon. There were many Indians living there. There was a lot of food everywhere. It was the year 1898. Many people were coming to North Canada to look for gold. The people came from everywhere. They came from many different countries. Everyone who came to look for gold first came to this city. Therefore, it was an important city. Gray Beaver came to the city to do business. He wanted to sell some blankets and other things to the people looking for gold. He wanted to make a lot of money, so he stayed in the city for many months. White Fang saw white people for the first time in Fort Yukon. They looked different than the Indians. They looked like another kind of people. White Fang had a strange feeling when he saw the white people. He did not trust them. He was also curious about them. He would often watch them for a long time. At first, he watched them from far away. Then he saw that they did not harm the other dogs. Therefore, he came closer to them. The white people were also curious about White Fang. When they saw him, they knew he was part wolf. They would often talk about him. They would point to White Fang as they talked. This made White Fang nervous. Whenever they walked too close to White Fang, he would show his teeth. Therefore, the white people never had a chance to touch him. Every 3 days, a large ship would come to Fort Yukon. Many white people would get off the ship. They would stay in Fort Yukon for a few days and then go to other places. During this time, White Fang saw many white people. He saw more white people than Indians. When the white people came to Fort Yukon, they brought their dogs. White Fang saw these dogs many times. They were very weak and slow. There were many different dogs that came with the white men. Some had short legs. Some had long legs. Some had long fur. Some had short fur. None of the white men's dogs knew how to fight. When the white men's dogs saw White Fang, they were afraid of him. They were afraid because he was a wolf. Therefore, their fear made them want to fight with him. When they attacked White Fang would fight them. Within a few seconds, he could seriously hurt them. Sometimes he even killed them. White Fang loved fighting with the white men's dogs. At first, he fought them only sometimes. Then he fought them every day. Because Gray Beaver was busy with business, White Fang had nothing to do. Therefore, day after day, he waited for the ships to arrive at Fort Yukon. Then he would attack the white men's dogs. Chapter 16. The White Man. A few white men lived at Fort Yukon all of the time. They looked down upon the other white men who came to Fort Yukon for only a few days. The white men that were at Fort Yukon all of the time felt that they were strong men. They thought that the other men were weak. This is because the environment of Fort Yukon was very difficult. The weather was very cold. Also, people often became sick. Therefore, because these men lived in Fort Yukon for many years and were still alive, they had a lot of pride. The Fort Yukon men enjoyed watching the other men suffer. Each time a new ship came to Fort Yukon, the men were happy. They loved to watch White Fang and the other dogs attack and kill the other white men's dogs. Every time a ship came, they were very excited. Therefore, many Fort Yukon men knew about White Fang. They knew that White Fang was a good fighter. There was one Fort Yukon man that really loved to watch White Fang fight. As White Fang attacked the other white men's dogs, this man would get very excited and shout with joy. As soon as a ship came to Fort Yukon, he would run to watch White Fang. Then, when the fight was over, he would sadly leave. He wanted White Fang. This man's name was Beauty Smith. Beauty was not his real name. No one at Fort Yukon knew his real name, so they called him Beauty. It was a joke that he was called Beauty. This was because he was actually extremely ugly. Nature was very cruel to him. He was a very small, short man. His head was quite small, but it had a strange shape. It was long, and the top of his head was pointed. His forehead was very large and wide. His eyes were very large. His jaw and chin were huge. His teeth were large and yellow. In fact, he was so ugly that people were shocked when they saw him. Not only was Beauty Smith ugly, he was also very cruel and mean. He had no friends. The other men did not trust him. They were even a little afraid of him. Beauty Smith really wanted to own White Fang. Every time that Beauty Smith saw White Fang, he would walk to him. White Fang was angry about this. He did not like Beauty Smith. He showed his teeth and growled at him. White Fang could feel that Beauty Smith was evil and bad. One day, Beauty Smith came to visit Gray Beaver. Before he arrived, White Fang knew Beauty Smith was coming. White Fang could hear and smell him. Therefore, he was very uncomfortable, so he walked to the edge of the camp. He watched Gray Beaver and Beauty Smith talk. Beauty Smith pointed to White Fang. White Fang was afraid and ran into the forest. Gray Beaver did not want to sell White Fang. Because he had sold many things to the white people, Gray Beaver had a lot of money. Therefore, he did not need Beauty Smith's money. Besides, White Fang was the best sled dog that Gray Beaver had ever seen. Also, he could fight better than any dog he had ever seen. Beauty Smith left Gray Beaver's camp. He had a plan. For the next several days he visited Gray Beaver many times. Every time he came, he gave Gray Beaver a bottle of wine. Gray Beaver loved the wine very much. He drank the wine. When he finished drinking the wine, he wanted more wine. He loved to be drunk. He began to buy a lot of wine. He spent a lot of his money. After many days, Gray Beaver discovered that he had spent all of his money on wine. Then Beauty Smith came to visit Gray Beaver. Gray Beaver agreed to sell White Fang. That night, White Fang returned to camp. He was walking in Fort Yukon all day. He was very tired. Also, he did not see Beauty Smith that day, so he was happy. As soon as White Fang lay on the ground to relax, Gray Beaver walked to White Fang. He put a rope on White Fang's neck. Then White Fang heard Beauty Smith walking to the camp. White Fang became very upset. He tried to get the rope off of his neck, but it was too tight. Beauty Smith arrived. He stood next to White Fang and stared at him. White Fang was frightened and angry. He showed his teeth and growled. Beauty Smith was holding a club. Gray Beaver gave the rope to Beauty Smith. Beauty Smith walked away, pulling the rope. White Fang did not get up. He did not move. Therefore, Beauty Smith stopped walking. Gray Beaver hit White Fang. White Fang got up. Then suddenly he ran to attack Beauty Smith. Beauty Smith used the club to hit White Fang. White Fang fell to the ground. Gray Beaver laughed at this. Beauty Smith began to walk again. This time, when he pulled the rope, White Fang obeyed. He walked slowly and sadly away from Gray Beaver. He growled quietly. As they walked, Beauty Smith held the club. He was ready to beat White Fang. Beauty Smith and White Fang arrived at Beauty Smith's house. Beauty Smith tied the rope to the house. Then Beauty Smith went inside to sleep. For an hour, White Fang sat next to the house. Then White Fang began to chew the rope. Within 10 seconds, he broke the rope. He returned to Gray Beaver's camp. He did not understand that he now belonged to Beauty Smith. He had always been with Gray Beaver. Therefore, he still thought that he belonged to Gray Beaver. The next morning, Beauty Smith came to the camp. Again, Gray Beaver tied a rope to White Fang. He gave the rope to Beauty Smith. This time, Beauty Smith began to beat White Fang. He beat White Fang for a long time. Since White Fang was tied to a rope, he could not escape the beating. It was the worst beating in his life. Gray Beaver had never beaten him like this. Because Beauty Smith was a cruel man, he enjoyed beating White Fang. He loved the feeling of his power. He loved controlling White Fang. After the beating, Beauty Smith took White Fang to his house. Beauty Smith again tied White Fang to his house. White Fang could not forget Gray Beaver. He could not control his thoughts. He wanted to return to Gray Beaver again. Because he had lived with Gray Beaver so long, he could not live with another man. Therefore, again he chewed the rope. The rope broke. For the second time, White Fang ran to Gray Beaver's camp. The next morning, Beauty Smith again arrived at the camp. Again, Gray Beaver put a rope on White Fang's neck. Again, he gave White Fang to Beauty Smith. This time, Beauty Smith beat White Fang for a very long time. It was far worse than the beating from the day before. After the beating, White Fang was very sick. He could hardly move. White Fang could not walk after the beating. Therefore, Beauty Smith had to wait a long time for White Fang to have enough strength to walk. Finally, when White Fang was strong enough, he followed Beauty Smith. They arrived at Beauty Smith's house. Beauty Smith then put a thick chain on White Fang's neck. White Fang could not break the chain. After that, White Fang had no chance to return to Gray Beaver. He never saw Gray Beaver again. Chapter 17. Hate and Violence. White Fang became very violent and fierce while living with Beauty Smith. Beauty Smith kept White Fang in a small cage behind his house. He also put a chain on White Fang's neck. Every day White Fang would stay in the cage with a chain on his neck. It was a terrible life. Furthermore, Beauty Smith knew that White Fang hated it when people laughed at him. It made White Fang extremely angry. Therefore, Beauty Smith would often stand outside of White Fang's cage. He would then point and laugh at White Fang. It would make White Fang crazy with anger. He hated Beauty Smith. He hated Beauty Smith more than any other person in the world. Beauty Smith made White Fang's life terrible for a reason. He wanted White Fang to be extremely hateful and violent because he wanted him to fight with other dogs. He wanted White Fang to win these fights. One day, many men came to the cage to see White Fang. Beauty Smith entered the cage. He took the chain from White Fang's neck. He then opened the door of the cage again. A huge dog entered the cage. White Fang did not know what to do. However, because he was angry about being in the cage all day, he attacked the dog. Within seconds, White Fang almost killed the dog. The men were excited. They shouted and clapped for White Fang. Then Beauty Smith quickly took the dog out of the cage. Before the fight, the men bet money on which dog would win the fight. That is, they chose the dog that they thought would win. Then they gave an amount of money to Beauty Smith. If their choice won the fight, Beauty Smith would give them double their original money. If their choice lost the fight, they would lose their money. Therefore, on that day, the men who chose White Fang as the winner got some money. They were happy. After this day, there were many fights. White Fang looked forward to the fights. It was the only time that Beauty Smith took the chain off of his neck. Also, it was the only time that he could express his anger. After the fights, he felt good and relaxed. White Fang always won the fights. Therefore, Beauty Smith was very happy. Because of White Fang, Beauty Smith made a lot of money. White Fang could fight any dog and win. One day, White Fang fought with 3 different dogs, one after another. Another day, he fought with a huge wild wolf from the forest. On another day, he fought 2 dogs at the same time. He won all of these fights. Later that year, during autumn, White Fang and Beauty Smith traveled on a ship to a northern city. White Fang was well known. Many people had heard of the fighting wolf from Fort Yukon. Therefore, many people on the ship came to look at him. Sometimes they laughed at him. It made him angry. He hated the people. He hated Beauty Smith the most. Whenever he saw Beauty Smith, he was very violent. However, because he was in a cage, he could do nothing. He could not attack Beauty Smith. Soon, White Fang and Beauty Smith arrived in the northern city. White Fang was famous in the city. People wanted to see him. They even paid Beauty Smith money to see him. Every day the people would come. During these days, Beauty Smith would not let White Fang sleep. If White Fang tried to sleep, Beauty Smith would hit White Fang. Then White Fang would be angry. Therefore, the people could see how fierce White Fang was. Sometimes Beauty Smith arranged a fight. He would take White Fang outside of the town. They would go into the forest. In the forest, the police would not find them. The police did not allow dog fights. Here, in the forest, White Fang fought many dogs. The fights in the forest were very violent. He usually killed the other dogs. He always won. He fought very quickly and with a lot of skill. He fought many dogs, so he had a lot of experience. Also, he never fell. He was always on his feet. Many dogs would try to make him fall, but they were never successful. The men who watched the fights were shocked that White Fang never fell. After a while, the people were bored. White Fang always won the fights. Therefore, now the fights were not exciting. He had fewer and fewer fights. Therefore, Beauty Smith wanted White Fang to fight more wild wolves. He paid Indians to catch wolves for White Fang to fight with. People came to watch White Fang fight the wolves. It was exciting, but White Fang always won. One time, the Indians caught a lynx. White Fang fought the lynx and won. After the lynx, White Fang did not fight for a long time. There was no animal near the town that was a good match for White Fang. In the spring, a new dog arrived in the town. The dog was a bulldog. Bulldogs are a kind of dog that fight very well. They have a very large head with a large jaw. Their bodies are very thick. Their legs are short, so their bodies are low and near to the ground. Beauty Smith wanted White Fang to fight the bulldog. Therefore, he arranged a fight. The people were excited. They were ready to see an interesting fight. Chapter 18. A Dangerous Fight. It was the day of the fight. Beauty Smith put a chain on White Fang's neck. He took him to the forest. The bulldog and the bulldog's owner were waiting for them. Many men came to watch. Beauty Smith took the chain from White Fang's neck. For the first time, White Fang did not immediately attack the other dog. When he saw the bulldog, he just stared at it and did not move. He had never seen a bulldog before. The bulldog's owner pushed the bulldog to White Fang. The bulldog also just stared at White Fang. It was confused. It did not understand that it was going to fight the huge wolf. People from the crowd were anxious. They shouted. Still, White Fang stared at the bulldog, and the bulldog stared at White Fang. The bulldog's owner wanted the fight to begin. He touched the bulldog's neck several times. This made the bulldog growl. The fight would soon begin. White Fang was ready. Then the bulldog's owner pushed the bulldog again. This time the bulldog ran to White Fang. White Fang quickly attacked the bulldog. He bit the bulldog. The bulldog was bleeding, but he still wanted to fight. He ran to White Fang. Before the bulldog attacked White Fang attacked the bulldog. This happened many times because White Fang was very quick. The bulldog, however, did not give up. White Fang bit the dog many times, but the dog was not seriously hurt. He had never seen such a tough and determined dog before. When White Fang bit the dog was silent. He did not scream in pain like the other dogs. The dog never stopped chasing White Fang. The bulldog was too short and had a huge jaw. The bulldog's huge jaw covered its throat. Therefore, White Fang could not kill the bulldog by biting its throat. Time passed. Again and again the bulldog ran to White Fang. Then White Fang attacked the bulldog or ran away from the bulldog. Then White Fang made a mistake. White Fang ran to the dog to push him and make him fall. Because the bulldog was very short, White Fang tripped. He fell. This was the first time that White Fang fell during a fight. When White Fang fell, the bulldog wasted no time. He quickly ran to White Fang and bit White Fang's neck with his huge jaws. The bulldog did not bite White Fang very tightly. Therefore, he did not immediately kill White Fang. White Fang got up and ran very quickly. He also shook his body to make the bulldog open its mouth and fall from his neck. It didn't work. The bulldog kept biting his neck. The bite was getting tighter. White Fang was very afraid. He knew that the bulldog would soon bite his neck very tightly. Then he would die. White Fang stopped moving. He was too tired to fight. The bulldog was still biting his neck. Then the bulldog pushed White Fang. White Fang fell again. The dog moved on top of White Fang. The bulldog's jaws were getting tighter. It was over. White Fang was going to die. The men watching the fight were very excited. They clapped and shouted. Suddenly, everyone heard a strange noise from the forest. It was the sound of dogs and sleds. The men watching the fight were afraid. They thought it was the police. It was not police, however. It was 2 men on sleds. Many dogs were pulling their sleds. One of the men was tall. His skin was smooth and clean. The other man was short. He had a mustache. When the 2 men saw the people in the forest, they stopped their sleds. They wanted to see what was happening. At this point, White Fang's body stopped moving. He could not breathe. Beauty Smith was angry. He could not believe White Fang was losing the fight. Therefore, at this time, he ran to White Fang. Again and again, he violently kicked White Fang. White Fang could do nothing but lay on the ground and prepare to die. As Beauty Smith kicked White Fang, someone in the crowd began to shout. Then, the tall man saw the dogs. He also saw Beauty Smith kicking White Fang. He ran to Beauty Smith. As Beauty Smith was about to kick White Fang again, the tall man hit Beauty Smith's face. Beauty Smith fell to the ground. Then, the tall man turned to the crowd. He screamed, "You people are horrible and cruel!" Beauty Smith got up. The tall man shouted, "You are a beast!" and hit Beauty Smith's face again. Beauty Smith fell to the ground again. After that, Beauty Smith stayed on the ground. He had no courage to fight the man. "Help me, Matt," the tall man said to the man with the mustache. Matt is the name of the man with the mustache. The men walked to the dogs. They tried to open the bulldog's mouth. They could not open it. The bulldog's jaws were too strong. The crowd was angry that the men stopped the fight. They began to shout and scream. The tall man made an angry face at the crowd. Again he screamed, "You beasts!" After that, the 2 men did not pay attention to the crowd. The tall man wanted to save White Fang. He hit the bulldog's head several times. Still, the bulldog did not open its mouth. Then he asked the crowd, "Will some of you help us?" But no one would help. Then Matt had an idea. He got his gun. Then he put the long part of the gun in the bulldog's mouth. He wanted to use the part of the gun to open the dog's jaws. When the bulldog's owner saw this, he said, "Be careful, don't break his teeth." Matt angrily replied, "Then I'll break his neck." The bulldog's owner was nervous. He then said, "Please, don't break his teeth." Matt said, "This is your dog. Okay, but you need to help me open the bulldog's mouth." The owner said, "I can't. I don't know how. This has never happened before." "Then go away and let me do this," shouted Matt angrily. The owner did not go away. He stayed next to the two men and watched. The tall man and Matt put the gun in one side of the dog's mouth. They were trying to get the gun through the other side, too. They were successful. They used the gun to help pull open the bulldog's mouth. Then, little by little, they opened the bulldog's mouth. "Take your dog," said the tall man to the bulldog's owner. The bulldog's owner held the bulldog. Then Matt and the tall man finally opened the bulldog's mouth. "Now," said the tall man. Then they quickly pulled White Fang's neck from the bulldog's mouth. "Take him away," said Matt to the bulldog's owner. White Fang was saved. However, because he had almost died, he was very weak. He tried many times to get up. He could not stand. His legs were too weak. He fell. He could not open his eyes. His mouth was open, and his tongue hung from his mouth. He looked like he was dead. Matt examined White Fang's body. He said, "I think he will be okay. He is breathing." Beauty Smith then stood up again. He came to look at White Fang. "Matt," said the tall man, "how much is a good sled dog worth?" Matt looked at White Fang. $300, he said. "What about an injured sled dog like this one?" asked the tall man. "Half, $150, answered Matt. The tall man looked at Beauty Smith. He said, "Did you hear that, Mr. Beast? I am going to take your dog. I will give you $150. He then opened his wallet and took out the money. Beauty Smith said, "I will not sell him." The tall man said, "You are selling him, because I am buying him. Here is your money. The dog is now mine. Are you going to take the money, or do I have to hit you again?" "All right, but this is not fair," said Beauty Smith. The tall man then walked from Beauty Smith to Matt. Matt was with White Fang. The men took White Fang and left. The owner of the bulldog asked some men in the crowd about the tall man. "Who is that?" he said. "His name is Weedon Scott," said one of the men. "He is a gold expert. He is good friends with many of the people in the government. He has a lot of power and a lot of friends. You do not want to make him angry." "I thought he was somebody important," said the bulldog's owner. Chapter 19. Hope. "It's hopeless," said Weedon Scott. He sat on the stairs outside of his house. He looked at Matt. Matt agreed. They looked at White Fang. White Fang was now in good health, but he was very violent and anxious. The men had a chain on his neck. White Fang was growling violently. His teeth were showing. His entire body was very tense. He wanted to attack Weedon Scott's other sled dogs. "It's a wolf," said Weedon Scott. "It's wild. It can't live with people." "Oh, I don't know," said Matt. "He might be part dog." "Why do you think that?" said Weedon Scott. "He knows about people. He probably has been living with people for a long time," said Matt. "How do you know?" said Weedon Scott. "Look at his chest. There are some marks there. He used to be a sled dog," said Matt. "You're right, Matt. He was a sled dog before he lived with Beauty Smith," said Weedon Scott. "I think he can be a sled dog again," said Matt. Weedon Scott looked at White Fang. He shook his head. He said, "I don't know. He's been with us for 2 weeks now. He is still wild." Matt said, "Give him a chance. Take the chain off." Weedon Scott nodded. Matt took a club in his hand. He then walked to White Fang. "He is looking at the club. That's a good thing. He is clever," said Weedon Scott. Matt took the chain off of White Fang's neck. White Fang could not believe he was free. He had lived with Beauty Smith for many months. During that time he was always in the cage, or there was always a chain on his neck. The only time he could walk freely was when he was fighting the other dogs. White Fang did not trust the 2 men. Although they had saved him from the bulldog, he expected that they would hurt him. He walked to the corner of the house. He looked at the men. Then he walked towards the 2 men. He stopped and watched them for several moments. "Will he run away?" asked Weedon Scott. "We will find out," answered Matt. "Poor thing," said Weedon Scott. Then he went inside the house. When he came back outside, he carried a piece of meat. He threw the meat to White Fang. Since White Fang did not trust the men, he did not eat the meat right away. He looked at and smelled the meat first. Suddenly, one of the other sled dogs ran to the meat. White Fang quickly attacked and killed the dog. At that time, Matt tried to rescue the dog by kicking White Fang. White Fang bit Matt's leg. There was blood all over the snow from Matt's leg and the dead sled dog. Matt screamed. Luckily, the wound was not very serious. Matt walked into the house to clean the wound. "It's hopeless, Matt," said Weedon Scott. "The only thing to do is kill him." Then he went to the house and took a gun. "Don't do it," shouted Matt. He explained, "The wolf has been living a horrible life. No one has ever been kind to him. We can't expect him to obey us right away. We need to give him some time." "Look, he killed one of our dogs. What about that?" said Weedon Scott. "That dog was stupid. He should not have run to the meat. Maybe it is better that he is dead. Every dog should be able to fight for its own meat," said Matt. "But look at yourself, Matt. He hurt you," said Weedon Scott. "I was stupid. I tried to kick him. I should not have done that. Therefore, he punished me well," said Matt. "Okay, I won't kill him," said Weedon Scott. "We will be very kind to him. Then we will see what happens." Weedon Scott then walked to White Fang. He gently talked to him. Matt said, "Take a club." Weedon Scott shook his head. He did not want to use violence. He wanted White Fang to trust him. White Fang was afraid. He had just killed this person's dog. He had also bit the man's friend. Therefore, he thought that the man was going to punish him. He showed his teeth and growled. The man did not have a club. He was trying to touch White Fang's head. He gently talked. His hand came closer to White Fang's head. White Fang was very tense. He did not want to hurt the man. However, he was a wolf. It was natural. He could not control himself. Weedon Scott always believed that he was quick enough to avoid animals' bites. This time, however, he learned how fast White Fang was. When White Fang bit his hand, he screamed in surprise. White Fang knew he had made a mistake. He expected a horrible beating. Matt ran to the house. He took the gun. "What are you doing?" shouted Weedon Scott. "Now he hurt you. Now I think we should kill him," said Matt. "No," shouted Weedon Scott. "Yes, watch me," shouted Matt. Weedon Scott said, "You said to give him a chance. Well, now we are giving him a chance. We have just started. We can't quit now. Besides, look at him." White Fang was at the corner of the house again. Matt was still holding the gun. He was fiercely growling and showing his teeth at Matt. The men were shocked. "Look how clever he is," said Matt. Weedon Scott agreed. He said, "He is very intelligent. He knows about guns. We need to give him a chance. Put the gun away." "Okay, I agree," said Matt, as he put the gun next to the house. "Look," said Weedon Scott. As soon as Matt put the gun down, White Fang was quiet. "Let's try something," said Matt. He took the gun again. White Fang growled fiercely. He put it down again. White Fang was quiet again. The men looked at one another. Matt said, "I agree, Mr. Scott. That wolf is too intelligent to kill." Chapter 20. Love and Kindness. 24 hours passed since White Fang bit Weedon Scott's hand. In the past, White Fang was always beaten after he hurt a person. Therefore, White Fang still expected punishment. He did not understand why the man had not beaten him yet. Weedon Scott walked to White Fang and sat on the ground. He did not hold a gun or a club. He held nothing. It was strange. Also, White Fang did not have a chain on his neck. He could walk or run anywhere that he wanted. He was not used to this type of situation, so he decided not to run away. He wanted to see what the man would do. The man was quiet. He did not move. He began to talk. His voice was very soft and gentle. No one had ever gently talked to White Fang before. It made White Fang feel very good. He started to feel safe with the man. After a while, the man got up. He went inside the house. Then he came outside again. He had a piece of meat in his hand. White Fang wanted to eat the meat, but he wasn't sure if he should. He looked at the meat and the man at the same time. The man held the piece of meat by White Fang's nose. He smelled the meat. It seemed okay to eat. Finally, the man put the meat on the ground near White Fang's feet. He carefully smelled the meat again. White Fang decided that the meat was safe. Then he ate the meat. Nothing happened. The man wanted to give him another piece of meat. The man put it on the ground again. White Fang ate the meat again. Weedon Scott repeated this many times. Finally, he did not put the meat on the ground. The meat stayed in his hand. Because the other meat was okay, White Fang decided to trust Weedon Scott. White Fang ate the meat from Weedon Scott's hand. Nothing bad happened. Again, White Fang ate meat from Weedon Scott's hand. The man then began talking again. His voice was very kind and gentle. Then the man moved his hand to White Fang's head. He kept on talking. The hand moved closer and closer. White Fang was nervous, but he let the man touch him. His body was very tense. His ears lay flat on his head, and he growled, but the man kept touching him. Weedon Scott moved his hand up and down on White Fang's fur. White Fang kept growling. His body was still very tense. Weedon Scott kept gently talking. He began to relax his body. When the man touched his fur, it was actually pleasant. White Fang was experiencing two opposite feelings. He was afraid and expecting the man to harm him. Yet, at the same time, he enjoyed the man's kindness. Suddenly, Matt came outside. He saw Weedon Scott touching White Fang. He was very surprised. "Wonderful!" he shouted. When Matt spoke, it frightened White Fang. White Fang jumped. He quickly ran from Weedon Scott. He growled at Matt. Matt looked at Weedon Scott. Then Weedon Scott walked to White Fang. At this time, White Fang continued to look at Matt and growl. He again touched White Fang's head. This time, White Fang was not afraid. White Fang started a new life with Weedon Scott. It was the first time a person was kind to him. Weedon Scott was very patient. It took a long time, but White Fang came to trust Weedon Scott. Weedon Scott never put a chain on White Fang. He allowed him to walk freely near the house. White Fang liked Weedon Scott, so he did not run away. His new life was much better than life with Beauty Smith. Because he liked Weedon Scott so much, White Fang guarded Weedon Scott and his house. At night, while the other dogs slept, White Fang would stay awake. He would walk near the house all night. If a person came to visit Weedon Scott at night, White Fang attacked the person. Then Weedon Scott would have to rescue the visitor. Over time, however, White Fang understood which people were visitors and which people were thieves. If the man walked loudly and confidently, then the man was a visitor. If the man walked quietly and nervously, then the man was a thief. Weedon Scott pitied White Fang. He knew that his past master was very cruel. Therefore, Weedon Scott was very kind to White Fang. Every day he spent a lot of time with White Fang. He often gently touched White Fang's fur. White Fang learned to enjoy this activity. Over time, White Fang began to love Weedon Scott. Therefore, when he was with Weedon Scott, he was extremely happy. When he was not with Weedon Scott, he was extremely sad. Weedon Scott became the most important thing in White Fang's life. He was the center of White Fang's world. Every morning, White Fang waited for Weedon Scott to come out of the house. Every night, when Weedon Scott returned home, White Fang would run to greet him. White Fang learned to not attack Weedon Scott's other dogs. The dogs, on the other hand, learned to live with White Fang. They knew he was stronger than them. Therefore, he became their leader. They always obeyed and respected him. Matt and Weedon Scott wanted White Fang to be a sled dog. Therefore, they prepared a sled and connected White Fang to the sled. Weedon Scott's sled was different from Gray Beaver's sled. It was light and easy to pull. Also, unlike Gray Beaver's other dogs, Weedon Scott's other dogs respected and followed the leader. They ran behind him and did not try to attack him. White Fang was very dependable. Every day he pulled the sled. Every night he guarded and protected Weedon Scott. He was Weedon Scott's best and most valuable dog. He quickly became the leader of the sled dog team. One day, Matt said, "This is the best sled dog that I have ever seen. You were very wise to take him from Beauty Smith." Weedon Scott made an angry and hateful face. "That beast!" he shouted. He hated Beauty Smith. In the spring, something terrible happened. One day, Weedon Scott disappeared. White Fang saw Weedon Scott leave the house with a suitcase. He did not understand that Weedon Scott was going on a trip. That night, he waited for his master to return. He waited an entire night, but his master never returned. In the morning, Matt opened the door and walked outside. White Fang stared at Matt sadly. He wanted to know where his master was. After many days, Weedon Scott still did not return. White Fang became seriously ill. It was the first time in his life that he was ill. Matt put White Fang inside the house. He tried to cure White Fang's illness, but he could not. He wrote a letter to Weedon Scott. In the letter, he told him about White Fang. He wrote, "The wolf won't work. He won't eat. He misses you very much. He might die." White Fang was extremely sad. His master had left him. He gave up. He began to let himself die. He would not eat. He allowed the other dogs to attack him and bite him. All day he lay near the stove, staring at the floor. He waited to die. One night, as Matt and White Fang sat in the house, White Fang suddenly got up. He began to excitedly cry. He stared at the door. Then Matt heard someone walking to the door. The door opened. It was Weedon Scott. "Where's the wolf?" he asked. Then he saw White Fang. He was standing near the stove. Weedon Scott looked at White Fang. He waited for the wolf to come to him. "Wow!" shouted Matt. "Look at his tail. It's wagging. He's very happy." Weedon Scott started to walk to White Fang. White Fang quickly ran to him. His eyes were bright and happy. "He's never looked at me that way," said Matt. Weedon Scott did not hear Matt. He was sitting on the floor with White Fang. He was touching White Fang's fur. White Fang was extremely happy. He pleasantly growled. Then he did something very unusual. Because of his joy, he found a new way to show the master his love. He pushed his body between Weedon Scott's arm and body. He rubbed his head against Weedon Scott's body. He was trying to hug Weedon Scott. Matt was shocked. "Look at him! I always knew he was more dog than wolf," he shouted. After Weedon Scott returned, White Fang rested for 2 more days. He was soon healthy again. Then he went outside. The other dogs tried to fight with him. Matt watched the fight. He cheered for White Fang. "Go, White Fang, go!" White Fang fought the other dogs. Because his master had returned, his spirit was extremely good. There was no stopping White Fang. Finally, the other dogs stopped. White Fang was their leader again. One night, when Matt and Weedon Scott sat in the house, they heard a man scream outside. Then they heard White Fang growl. The 2 men looked at each other and got up. Matt said, "Get a light." When they went outside, they saw a man laying on the ground. His arms were across his face and neck. He was trying to protect himself from White Fang's teeth. White Fang wanted to bite the man's neck and kill the man. The man's arms were bleeding. There was a lot of blood in the snow surrounding the man. Weedon Scott took White Fang. He pulled him from the man. White Fang was growling and showing his teeth. Matt helped the man get up. The man took his arms off of his face. It was Beauty Smith. Then Matt saw two things in the snow. One was a large club. The other was a thick steel chain. Matt showed the things to Weedon Scott. Then Matt pushed Beauty Smith away from the house. At the time, Weedon Scott was standing with White Fang. He was gently touching him and talking to him. He said, "He tried to steal you, didn't he? Well, that was a mistake." White Fang's body was tense. He growled and growled. However, he soon relaxed. His master was protecting him. Chapter 21. The Coming Journey. White Fang knew something bad was going to happen. "Listen to that," said Matt one night. When he and Weedon Scott were eating supper, they were hearing a cry from outside the house. It was White Fang. Weedon Scott shouted. When White Fang heard Weedon Scott's voice, he was quiet. He wanted to be sure that his master was still in the house. "The wolf knows you will leave," said Matt. Weedon Scott looked at Matt. His face was very sad. He said, "I can't take a wolf to California. He would probably kill other people's dogs. Then the police would take him and kill him." Matt nodded. Outside the house, White Fang started to cry again. "He definitely loves you," said Matt. Weedon Scott was suddenly angry. He shouted, "Shut up! I know what is best. I cannot take him with me." Matt said, "I agree, but—" "But what?" said Weedon Scott. "Well, don't be angry," said Matt. "It looks like you really don't know what to do about the wolf. You haven't decided yet. You have probably been thinking about it for a long time." Weedon Scott was quiet. In a calm voice, he said, "You're right. I really don't know what I should do with him, but it would be a mistake to take him with me." Matt agreed. He said, "I just don't understand how he knows that you will leave." "I don't know either," said Weedon Scott. "That wolf is too intelligent." The next day, White Fang saw Weedon Scott packing a suitcase. Therefore, he knew that his master was leaving. He knew that his master was not going to take him along. His sadness was unbearable. That night he cried the entire night. Inside the house, the two men were preparing to sleep. They listened to White Fang's cries. Matt said, "He stopped eating again. He stopped eating when you left last time. This time he will probably die." "Oh, shut up," shouted Weedon Scott. The next day, White Fang was very anxious and tense. When Weedon Scott left the house, he followed him closely. When he was inside the house, White Fang waited for him outside the door. Every time the door opened, White Fang could see the suitcases. A few hours later, two men came to the house. They took the suitcases. Matt helped them. When Matt came back to the house, White Fang was still outside the door waiting for his master. Weedon Scott then opened the door and let White Fang come inside. He gently touched White Fang. He said, "I'm sorry. I have to leave. You cannot come with me. White Fang pushed his head to his master's body. He wanted to hug him. Then Matt said, "The ship is here. You have to go now. Hurry, don't be late. I'll lock the door." They left White Fang inside the house. Then they shut the door and locked it. They could hear White Fang crying. Weedon Scott said, "You must take good care of him. Write a letter to me and tell me how he is doing." "Sure," said Matt, "but just listen to him. He is so sad that you are leaving him." The two men stopped talking and walking. They listened to White Fang cry. It was the saddest cry they had ever heard. It made the men feel extremely sad. It broke their hearts. Then they began to sadly walk to the ship. They arrived at the ship. The ship was going from Canada to California. There were many people on the boat. Many of the people had come to Canada to look for gold, but they were not successful. Now they were ready to go home. The two men were standing on the boat. They shook hands and said goodbye. Suddenly, they saw White Fang standing on the boat. They were shocked. "Did you lock the door?" said Weedon Scott. "Yes," said Matt. He thought for a moment and said, "But I forgot to close the window. He used the window. I'm sorry. I'll take him back with me." Weedon Scott thought for a moment. Then he said, "No need, Matt. I have made a decision. I'm taking him with me." Matt smiled. "Goodbye," he said. "Don't forget to cut his fur when the weather is hot." "Goodbye," shouted Weedon Scott. After Matt left, Weedon Scott sat with White Fang. He looked at the dog and smiled. Then he lovingly and gently touched the wolf's head and ears. "Growl for me," he said. Chapter 22. California. After many days on the ship, Weedon Scott and White Fang arrived in San Francisco, California. When White Fang got off the ship, he was very afraid. He saw huge buildings, many people, many automobiles, and huge electric streetcars. Life in California was entirely different from life in Arctic Canada. Weedon Scott and White Fang next went to the train station. The train would not allow White Fang inside the passenger section. Therefore, they put him in the luggage section of the train. This was a horrible experience for White Fang. It was one of the most frightening of his life. He was put in the corner of the dark car with the passenger suitcases. He had a thick chain on his neck and could hardly move. White Fang thought that his master had left him. Then he smelled the master's luggage. He protected the luggage for the rest of the trip. Suddenly, after many dark hours, the door opened. A man tried to take Weedon Scott's luggage from the car. White Fang did not allow this to happen. He growled at the man. An hour later, Weedon Scott came to the car. The man said, "That dog won't let me go near your things." When White Fang got out of the train, he was very surprised. The city had disappeared. He was now in the California countryside. It was very sunny and relaxing. A carriage was waiting for them. A man and a woman got out of the carriage. They walked to Weedon Scott. When the woman tried to hug Weedon Scott, White Fang did not understand. He thought the woman was trying to hurt his master. He began to growl and show his teeth. "It's all right, mother," said Weedon Scott. "He thought you wanted to harm me. He wanted to protect me." He will learn who you are very soon." Then he said to White Fang in a loud, strong voice, "Down, down!" White Fang lay on the ground. He obeyed his master. The master hugged his mother again. Weedon Scott and his parents got in the carriage. Then the carriage left the train station. White Fang ran behind the carriage. 15 minutes later, they arrived at a large, beautiful stone gate. Behind the gate there was a garden with a huge area of grass. Behind the grass was a large house. The house was extremely beautiful. It was very tall and had many windows. Because this was the countryside, there were fields behind the house. Few other houses were nearby. White Fang did not look at these things for long. As soon as he arrived, another dog suddenly attacked him as he was looking at the house. It was a sheepdog. A large dog traditionally used by sheep farmers to help control their sheep. And she was angry to see another dog at her house. The dog was female. Therefore, White Fang refused to fight with her. He never fought with female dogs. White Fang tried to avoid her, but the sheepdog was angry. She knew that White Fang was a wolf. Therefore, she wanted to attack him. She kept running to him and biting him, but he did nothing. This continued for a few moments. Finally, the man in the carriage called to her. "Here, collie!" he shouted. Weedon Scott laughed. "It's okay, father," he said. "He'll get used to it." The carriage started to move. It was going to the house. White Fang tried to run after it, but Collie blocked his way. Then he ran quickly to the side to get away from her. She followed closely, but White Fang was too fast. White Fang then ran to the house. The carriage had stopped, and Weedon Scott stepped out. White Fang was running very quickly to his master. Then, suddenly, another dog hit him. It was a hound. A hound is a bird-hunting dog originally from Britain. Because White Fang was running so fast, the hound made White Fang fall. White Fang was extremely angry. When he got up, he prepared to attack the hound. He growled a frightening growl. He showed his teeth. Weedon Scott saw this. He knew that White Fang could easily kill the hound, so he ran to the dogs. It was actually Collie, however, that saved the hound from White Fang. Just when White Fang was about to attack and probably kill the hound, Collie attacked White Fang. Again, White Fang fell. At that time, Weedon Scott arrived. He held White Fang, and his father took the other dogs away. Then the carriage left the house. Some other strange people came out of the house. 2 women walked to Weedon Scott. They too hugged Weedon Scott. This time, however, White Fang accepted it. Some of the people called to White Fang. He was frightened and growled at them. However, the master touched White Fang's head to calm him. Everyone then went inside the house. They took White Fang inside the house with them. When he entered the house, he looked around carefully for danger. When he felt safe, he lay by his master. He was at his new home. Chapter 23. The Wolf of Sierra Vista. White Fang was getting used to his new home. It was an interesting place. It even had a name. It was called Sierra Vista. Weedon Scott's father, Judge Scott, owned the house and the land around it. After a few days, White Fang had no more trouble with the other dogs. The dogs understood that White Fang was going to live with them at Sierra Vista. Dick, the hound, even tried to be friends with White Fang. However, because White Fang never had any friends, this didn't happen. He did not pay attention to Dick or Collie. Whenever White Fang saw them coming to him, he would walk away. White Fang had many things to learn about living at Sierra Vista. He had to learn about Weedon Scott's family. There were many new people to know. The first people to know were Weedon Scott's parents, Judge Scott and his wife. Then there were Weedon Scott's sisters, his wife, and his 2 young children. The children were 4 and 6 years old. Because they were related to his master, White Fang accepted these people and wanted to protect them. It was especially difficult to accept the children. He had always hated children. He never trusted them. When the children first came to him, he growled. However, after Weedon Scott shouted at him, he was quiet. He let the children touch him. After time, he began to like the 2 children. When they came to him, he was very pleased. White Fang also learned to like Judge Scott. White Fang liked watching him read the newspaper every day. White Fang also learned many things about the land outside of the house. He knew that Judge Scott's land was huge, but did not know where it stopped being Judge Scott's land. After leaving Judge Scott's land a few times, he learned which land was his and which was another man's. Another lesson White Fang had to learn was to accept other animals. In the wild, White Fang killed and ate other animals. In Sierra Vista, however, there were many other animals like chickens and sheep. The Scott family raised these animals to eat. One day, White Fang saw a chicken walking in the yard. The chicken had escaped from the chicken cage. White Fang killed and ate the chicken. He did not know that it was a mistake. Later that day, he found another chicken walking in the yard. A man working on the farm saw White Fang preparing to attack the chicken. He angrily shouted at White Fang. Then the man took a stick and tried to hit White Fang with the stick. White Fang was angry. He forgot the chicken and ran to the man. The man cried, "My God!" and tried to run away. White Fang only bit the man's arm. He did not seriously hurt the man, but the man was very frightened. When Weedon Scott heard what had happened, he said, "The wolf will learn. I will teach him not to kill the chickens." That night, White Fang killed more chickens. In the morning, Weedon Scott found White Fang eating the dead chickens. He wanted to teach White Fang, so he shouted at White Fang in a frightening voice. He forced White Fang to look at the chickens as he shouted. White Fang now understood. He knew that he could never kill another chicken. When Weedon Scott told his father about the lesson, Judge Scott did not believe it. "He will keep killing the chickens," Judge Scott said. Weedon Scott did not agree. He challenged his father. "I'll put White Fang in the chicken cage for the entire afternoon. He will not kill any chickens, you'll see," he said. That afternoon, Weedon Scott put White Fang in the chicken cage with 40 chickens. He did not kill a single chicken. In fact, he did not even pay attention to the chickens. For the entire afternoon, he just laid on the ground and relaxed. The family was very impressed. Judge Scott said to White Fang, "You are smarter than I thought." After learning his lessons at Sierra Vista, White Fang had one last problem. Every time he went into town with his master, 3 dogs would run after him and try to attack him. Because he wanted to be a good dog, he did not harm the dogs. One day, the owner of the dogs told the dogs to attack White Fang. When Weedon Scott saw this, he was angry. He stopped the carriage. Then he said to White Fang, "Go get them!" Within minutes, White Fang had attacked and killed the dogs. After this fight, White Fang was famous in the town. Other people's dogs no longer tried to attack him. Chapter 24. The Best Wolf. Time passed. There was a lot of food and no work to do at Sierra Vista. Therefore, White Fang was becoming fat. All of the people around him were very kind to him. It was the happiest time in White Fang's life. However, one thing still troubled White Fang. He was different from the other dogs. He was a wolf. Therefore, he still could not forget his life in the forest, the Indians, or his work pulling sleds. He missed the snow very much. Also, because he was never friends with the other dogs, he was a little lonely. However, he was used to this life. White Fang learned to play fight, or wrestle, with Weedon Scott. Often, master and dog would play like this and pretend to fight with each other. Every time that fight was over, however, Weedon would hug White Fang for several moments, and White Fang would be extremely happy. Of course, White Fang would let no other person play with him this way. Sometimes, Weedon Scott would ride a horse in the fields next to Sierra Vista. White Fang would always go with him on these rides. All day he would run next to his master's horse. He never became tired. One day, Weedon Scott was riding his horse, and White Fang was walking nearby. Suddenly, a rabbit ran under the horse. The rabbit scared the horse so much that the horse jumped. When the horse jumped, Weedon Scott fell off of the horse. He fell on his leg and broke his leg. He told White Fang to go and get help. Go home, he said. Luckily, White Fang knew what the word home meant. However, he did not want to leave his master, who he was always with. Weedon Scott kept telling White Fang to go and get help. He used his hand to point to the house. Finally, White Fang understood. He ran to the house. The family was sitting outside of the house. Judge Scott was reading a newspaper, and the others were talking to each other. When White Fang arrived, he was breathing heavily, and his fur was very dirty and sweaty. "Weedon is coming back," said Judge Scott. The children were very happy and ran to greet White Fang. However, White Fang growled at the children and walked straight to Judge Scott and his wife.
"I'm afraid he will hurt the children,"
said Judge Scott's wife. During this time, White Fang growled very loudly. He did not know how to tell the family about his master. The family did not understand. Judge Scott replied to his wife, "Yes, I really do not trust wolves." White Fang was fiercely growling. "Go away," Judge Scott shouted. Judge Scott did not understand. So White Fang walked to Weedon Scott's wife. He bit her dress and began to pull it. He ripped it. She screamed. Everyone was looking at him. He stopped growling and looked at all of the people's faces. His body made many strange small movements. He was nervous. He did not know how to tell them.
"I hope he is not going crazy,"
said Weedon's mother.
"I heard that if an animal moves from a cold climate to a hot climate, he will become crazy."
Weedon Scott's sister said,
"I think he's trying to talk to us."
After a few moments of thinking, Weedon Scott's wife said,
"Something has happened to Weedon. He is in trouble."
They all stood up and walked to White Fang. He ran, then he stopped and looked at them to see if they were following. They were following him. He led them to his master. After this event, everyone at Sierra Vista knew he was a smart, special wolf. They loved him. Only Judge Scott was still not sure about White Fang. He still did not trust him. More time passed. Winter was coming to Sierra Vista. The days were getting shorter. Something strange happened. Collie suddenly became very friendly with White Fang. She often wanted to play with White Fang and be friends. Whenever she was around White Fang, she forgot about how terrible he had made her life when he first arrived at Sierra Vista. One day, Collie and White Fang ran together in the fields and forest next to Sierra Vista. Collie ran first, and then White Fang followed her. It was delightful. On that day, Weed and Scott went riding. It was the first time that White Fang did not go with him. White Fang enjoyed his time with Collie. For the entire afternoon, Collie and White Fang ran together. They ran the same way that White Fang's mother Kitchi ran with White Fang's father before White Fang was born. Chapter 25. A True Hero. At this time, a very frightening man escaped from a prison near Sierra Vista. There were many stories about the escape in every newspaper. He was a very fierce and terrible man who lived a terrible life. Society did not like him. He was a beast. When he was in prison, he was terrible. The prison guards often punished him, but the punishment did not change him. He would often fight with the other prisoners or guards and win the fights. The prison guards would beat him or starve him. He never changed. The man's name was Jim Hall. He had a difficult life. His hard life had made him the way that he was. Therefore, it wasn't entirely his fault. Once, while in jail, one of the guards was very bad to him. The guard lied to him many times. The guard also lied to the prison officials. He told them many things about Jim Hall that were not true. Therefore, Jim Hall was very angry. One day when he got the chance, he jumped on the guard and killed the guard. After killing the guard, Jim Hall lived in a new room in the prison. He lived in the room alone. For 3 years, he never left the room. Also, he never saw the sky, sunshine, or stars. There was no light in the room. He was almost always in the dark. He never saw any other person. He never talked. This experience made him crazy. It made him a beast. One night he escaped. No one knew how. One day a guard noticed that the room was empty. He also saw the dead bodies of 3 prison guards that Jim Hall had killed lying on the floor. When Jim Hall escaped, he took the dead guards' guns. Therefore, he was very dangerous. The California government offered a lot of money to anyone who could find Jim Hall. Many people and their dogs searched the state for him. No one ever found him. He had disappeared. Everyone was very afraid. Every day they read the newspaper hoping that Jim Hall was back in prison. People at Sierra Vista were particularly afraid. They had a reason to be afraid. Weed Scott's father, Judge Scott, was a judge. He worked in the courtroom where Jim Hall had his trial. Therefore, Judge Scott decided that Jim Hall should go to prison for 50 years. Therefore, Jim Hall blamed Judge Scott for his horrible life in prison. Before he went to prison, Jim Hall said that he would kill Judge Scott if he ever got out of prison. Therefore, now that Jim Hall had escaped, the Scott family was very worried. Only one Scott family member, White Fang, was not worried. He did not know anything about Jim Hall. White Fang and Weedon Scott's wife had a secret. Every night, after the people at Sierra Vista had gone to sleep, she would open up the front door of the house and let White Fang come inside. Then, in the mornings, she would get up early and put White Fang outside before anyone woke up. One night, as White Fang was sleeping inside the big house, he awoke. He smelled the air. Something was not right. He smelled a man that he did not know. Then he heard the man moving. Then White Fang saw the man. As the man moved, White Fang followed him. Because White Fang was a good hunter, he knew how to secretly follow the man. He was waiting to attack the man. The man stopped at the stairs. He was waiting to walk up the stairs. He listened. Weedon Scott and his family were upstairs. White Fang wanted to protect them, so he would not allow the man to walk up the stairs. As the man put his leg on the first step, White Fang attacked. He jumped on the man's back. He bit the man's neck. The man then fell. White Fang fell with him, but before they got to the floor, White Fang jumped. Everyone in the house awoke. They were afraid and surprised. They heard White Fang's fierce growl downstairs. Then they heard a gun. A man was screaming. Furniture and glass were breaking. After 5 minutes, the noise stopped. The Scott family was at the top of the stairs. Weedon Scott turned on the light. Suddenly, the Scott family saw what had happened. They saw a man's body lying at the bottom of the stairs. The man's neck was very bloody. He was dead. Judge and Weedon Scott walked downstairs. Judge Scott looked at the man. "It's Jim Hall," he said. He looked at his son for a long moment. He was shocked to see Jim Hall's body. Then the two men looked at White Fang. White Fang was lying on the floor. He was on his side. His eyes were halfway closed. He could hardly move. The man had shot White Fang with the gun. White Fang was close to death. Weedon Scott sadly said, "He's going to die." "No, he won't. Not if I can help him," shouted Judge Scott. Then Judge Scott ran to the telephone to make a phone call. Soon, a doctor arrived at Sierra Vista. After working on White Fang for an hour and a half, he said, "He has 1 chance in 1,000. He will probably die." The entire Scott family was with the doctor as he told them about White Fang. He said, "White Fang has a broken leg and 3 broken ribs. He was shot 3 times with the man's gun, and he has almost no blood in his body now." "Then we must do everything that we can," shouted Judge Scott. "We will take him to the city and have many doctors help him." "I understand. But for now, we need to watch him. Make sure that his temperature doesn't change. Someone must watch him all of the time. I will be back tomorrow at 10 a.m., said the doctor. All night and all morning, Weedon Scott, his wife, and his sisters stayed with White Fang. White Fang did not die. Because the doctor was used to working with weak, sick patients, he thought White Fang would die. However, White Fang's body was very strong. Therefore, White Fang had an advantage over the doctor's usual patients. For many weeks, White Fang's body was covered in bandages. He could not move. He slept a lot. He dreamed a lot. He had many dreams about Kitchi Gray Beaver, and Beauty Smith. The most frightening dream was about the city with its large buildings and many cars. He also dreamed about the dark luggage car on the train. It was terrifying. At last, the day came when the doctor took off White Fang's bandages. Weedon Scott was so happy that he took White Fang in his arms. Everyone was very happy and excited, because White Fang did not move his body for several weeks. He was very weak. When he tried to stand up, he fell. This happened many times. The doctor was also there. He said, "He will learn to walk again. Take him outside so he can practice walking." White Fang went outside. Every person at Sierra Vista was watching. Because White Fang was weak, he lay on the ground many times to rest. Then he got up and walked again. White Fang walked until he saw Collie. Collie was lying in the doorway of the barn. There were many tiny puppies lying with her. Since White Fang had not seen the puppies before, he stopped and lay down to watch them. Weedon Scott then put one of the puppies next to White Fang. He stared at the puppy. He smelled the puppy. At the same time, the puppy smelled him. Their noses touched. Then the puppy licked his nose with its warm tongue. White Fang did not know why, but he licked the puppy's face. Everyone was pleased to see White Fang with his puppies. They clapped their hands and cheered. White Fang was confused by this and looked at the people. Suddenly, all of the puppies ran to him. They licked and smelled him. Then they jumped and climbed on his body. White Fang was very happy. For the rest of the afternoon, White Fang lay in the sunshine with his puppies.